enable a lot of participation. You cannot leave it to the academics or the companies, because even in this setting, look at all the civil society organizations who come and participate here. It's only very recently we are seeing a lot of people who have been active traditionally, deciding about what social justice is, were not active in this space. If it took them so long and they're still not here, what will happen if we all are not participating in what is now being determinative of our lives later on? You have seen, at least in 2017 itself, there have been at least 6 major big groups which have now come up, which are right now looking into what either ethics would be of AI or what people would be, and research. This is just a precursor, because self-regulation by companies is always what comes first before codified law comes. Law comes much later, politicians join a little later to the party, but self-regulation comes first. Now, if 2017 is what we saw, the formation of these companies, we are going to now start seeing the results in 2018, 2019. So I'm not saying we're already late, but it's already time to start participating, demanding the transparency. The other thing which I just want to say is that coming from a different part of the world, I do practice in New York as well as in New Delhi. In some parts of the world, technology is still very fascinating. When you look at something, when it can tell you this is my face, and it can suggest in a photograph that you should be tagging such a thing, it's a very fascinating to somebody whose first interaction with computer is a small device. It's not the same as someone who grew up on computers and who hasn't leapfrogged into this generation. So a lot of people who are unconnected and coming online for the first time, they still think of this as big magic, and they're very fascinated. The narrative in a lot of these countries is innovation trumps everything. Governments want and now are selling that everything's subservient to innovation. Government want to move fast and break things, thereby forgetting a lot of traditional values of democracy, social justice, and equity, which it has taken generations for us to build. But because innovation is most important and economic development is the major goal, it's easy to ignore all of these. I would say a few other things, but I think my time is running. But I do want to stress upon that our role in building intelligent data sets that can teach the machines to develop this kind of artificial intelligence cannot be underscored or emphasized enough. There's an opportunity to create a full spectrum of training sets that reflect a richer portrait of humanity with inclusivity and diversity. Because right now, it's only few kind of human beings who are making those data sets, or who already have the privilege to be using the tech, are the ones who are going to be teaching. So if skin color, if culture, if gender, if various other things which we think is what make the human race are not even being reflected in the data sets, we're really far away from what the machine will actually learn and then spit it out.
Thank you so much, Mishi. In the second part of the workshop, which we would soon move to after 2 speakers' interventions, we are going to focus on what can we do about it, because this is a framing of the issue about what is the problem. But as social justice activists, we are very interested in actually being able to do about things. So we are going to get into that discussion soon. But before that, the next speaker is Preetham Malur from ITU, which, as you know, is an intergovernmental organization. And he will describe the kind of spaces that are already getting built in international policy venues for these discussions, because we need to reach these discussions to the policy venues. There isn't much time. Thank you, and Preetham, please.
Thanks, Parminder, and of course, thank you for the invitation. So this is a topic of personal interest for me, because before I joined the ITU, and I've been here for 10 years, for around 12, 13 years, I worked as an AI engineer, as a researcher in AI. So this was a time when it wasn't marketing, there wasn't a marketing buzz around it, there was no money around it, you know. no money in it, and most of the money was in networking. So if you are a computer scientist in this room, you would know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so let me start on a positive note here. From the ITU perspective, from the UN perspective, for us it's very clear. AI has the potential, and I underline has the potential to improve lives around the world in fundamental ways, and it could play a major part in achieving the SDGs. I'm saying could and has the potential because there are significant challenges, and we need to overcome those challenges before we get to where we need to be. But any area that you look in, any area where you can have sufficient, decent quality data, or can have the means to collect that data, AI can have an impact. It could be, health, nutrition, accessibility for people with disabilities, transportation, poverty, many different areas. But again, these are just early days. We can see a lot more happen, a lot more good happen. But all this will happen only if we manage to come together to tackle the challenges. And the challenges are very complex and multifaceted. You've heard it, and you will be hearing it throughout this session and many other sessions. There are ethical issues, of course. And these are issues that I'm hearing conversations within the UN on. Ethical issues, of course, ensuring ethical conduct from autonomous AI systems, avoiding unfair bias in AI systems, concerns about privacy, about identifying liability. There's this whole other topic about lethal autonomous weapons. There's a governmental group of experts meeting. There's an organization called the UN ODA, Office of Disarmament Affairs, which manages that. It's chaired by the Indian ambassador in Geneva, disarmament ambassador. So that's a whole separate process. There are technical challenges, and I'm trying to give a category to each of these challenges, but all these are interrelated. So technical challenges, ensuring algorithmic transparency is something which comes up all the time. Data challenges, ensuring security if you're using AI for mission-critical applications. Then there's the big transformational socio-economic challenges, of course, ensuring that the developing countries don't get marginalized, especially those who have a large part of their population unconnected. You still have less than 50% of the world connected. You want to make sure that the social and gender inequalities are not amplified. And there's the component about jobs, of course, social welfare systems, impact on social welfare systems, at least in the short to medium term. So there's a big concern that a more sophisticated form of digital divide is opening up, and which would have profound implications for inequality globally. So at the UN, the UN Secretary General has already termed this as a frontier issue, and he said he's strongly committed to promoting global cooperation on this emerging issue. At the AI for Good Summit that ITU organized, I'll touch a little upon it later. At that summit, the UN Secretary General said that the UN stands ready to be a universal platform for discussion, and together we need to make sure that AI is used to enhance human dignity and serve the global good. And this is what we should all strive for. So at the UN, we are looking at it from a system-wide perspective, not as individual agencies, even though we have a lot of work going on individually. So there are, I would say there are three angles under which we are looking at this topic. One is how should UN structure its response, of course. And some of the conversation I hear, of course, the number one is providing a platform for global multi-stakeholder dialogue. The AI for Good Summit that was organized in June is one instance of that. Establishing an external panel of experts to advise the UN on different facets. Clearly, the expertise is outside the UN. We have expertise, but the top guys are outside the UN, and we recognize that. Establishing an interagency collaborative mechanism, an internal one, to kind of make sure that the agencies are coordinated. The second group, what research and review action should be undertaken. Example, reviewing the impact of AI on current UN frameworks, or having more evidence-based research on social impact, including the whole narrative on jobs, whether there will be more jobs produced in the long term while we lose jobs in the medium term. We talk about it, but we need more evidence. So that's something that different agencies are looking at, especially the ILO. And the third set is, of course, capacity building, which will be key. There's a big concern that the whole discussion is being shaped in some countries, some regions, and also it's very clear, we need to ensure a fair, equitable, non-discriminatory distribution of the benefits of AI, and especially if we aim to support the implementation of the SDGs. So different agencies are doing different things. Thank you, I'm done almost. So different agencies are doing different things. At the ITU, we have organized the first AI for Good Summit this June with 20 UN agencies partnering with XPRIZE. Some of the top guys in the world were there. Representatives from all stakeholders were there. This year, we plan to organize it, next year, 2008. We'll have it May 15 to the 17th of May, and we invite you to mark your calendars. There are other things we are doing, like we have a focus group on machine learning and 5G, a lot of technical work. And if you look at other agencies, they also have a whole body of work. If you're interested, I'd be happy to explain it. Thanks.
Thank you, Preetham. And I think this was important because we should recognize that is a positive force, actually. And that's good Preetham introduced it, because we become too critical because we are talking about the problems of it. So basically it's a positive force, like industrialization was. We could not have done without industrialization. And now digitalization is like that. It is positive force, greatly increases efficiencies in all areas. So this is what we are going to use in all areas, but our questions are also what to do with its negative effects and how to make it equitable and socially just. So the last speaker here is Malvika Jairam, who is from the Digital Asia Hub, which along with some other organizations as a network have been working on this area, and she will bring the different streams of these discussions which have been happening into this workshop. Malvika, please.
Thank you. I always feel this is one of those conversations that's very much like the old, Life of Brian, Monty Python thing, for those of you who have as terrible a sense of humor as I do. It's sort of like, what have the Romans done for us? I always think it's the same sort of conversation with artificial intelligence. It's like, what can AI do? Well, yeah, of course, the roads, the planning, the transport, the sewage, all of this. But apart from that, what has it done for us? And I feel in a lot of conversations, we're sort of veering towards that end of the thing where there are all these amazing capabilities, there's all this potential that could or hasn't yet been realized, but we really want to focus on the dark side of, apart from all of those great achievements, like what is it really doing? And I think that's actually a really, really helpful space to be, because I think it forces us to look at problem solving. It forces us to look at what things can go wrong. But I think many of us tend to live in that dark space a lot longer. I think for me, what is really interesting is the conversations that AI is forcing from a social justice point of view. You have a robot or an AI like Sophia awarded citizenship in Saudi Arabia, and suddenly we're all discussing what rights normal people have who are not robots or AI in certain countries, which I think is a really powerful frame. Saying, are we suddenly treating them better than we're treating humans? Do they have rights that we don't have? And I think Joanna Bryson, who I see here, wrote this great blog post about how, if we gave robots rights, we'd almost certainly do it unjustly. So I think that's a really useful provocation in saying, in trying to think of what kind of rights we give AI or we give robots, should we also be thinking about the rights we're not giving certain demographics or certain people in meat space? I think the conversations around bias and discrimination, again, is a really sort of good feedback loop in terms of offline, online. I was teaching a class in Hong Kong last week, and some of my students came to me and said, yeah, we get all the risks, we understand what's terrifying about all of this, but look at us. When we walk into a store, or we walk into a bank, or we try to enter a nightclub, we're discriminated because of the way we look without them knowing anything about us. Maybe online we have a chance of actually being treated fairly when they don't know anything about our attributes or what we look like or the fact that we're Chinese. So actually maybe offline is more discriminatory than online, and maybe AI can actually help mask certain features or characteristics. Maybe it's a fairer space for us to be. And that was a really interesting perspective. I think it's forcing us to have a conversation about skills, and I think it's a very fraught conversation because, as with most things, the work, the emotional and physical labor of being digitally literate, of being included, of having access, is often visited on the people least able to do it. You're making people, you're asking people to get literate when they're the ones that are being discriminated against. The platforms and the infrastructure are never asked to do things by default or by design or at the infrastructure level, yet the poorest, weakest, most marginalized are asked to perform the labor of being included and having systems work in their favor. And I think that's another important conversation that this has triggered. The conversation about innovation, I mean, Mishi was talking about how innovation trumps everything. And I see that a lot in Asia. We ran 3 conferences in Hong Kong, Seoul, and Tokyo. And it's very much the narrative. And you can see why, because a lot of countries see something like AI as a chance to leapfrog and catch up on phases of development that they've missed out on. And they sort of say, we didn't participate in many other stages of the Industrial Revolution. Maybe this is going to free us. Maybe this is where we have competitive advantage. Maybe this is what we can turn our IT resources, which are significant, maybe that's what we can turn them to now that the outsourcing boom is waning. So they see it as potential and opportunity. And as I said in another session we did just before this one, they see it as an opportunity to fill missing populations in countries that are aging, in countries that are not having as many children being born. They see something like this as filling a missing labor workforce or jobs that people aren't doing, or where countries have really strong immigration controls. They see it as a way of actually providing companionship, robots, help for older people that they would otherwise be having immigrants do. So I think, again, those are all really interesting ways that it's playing out and that have a link to equity. I think it also brings up this question of what is algorithmically solvable. I mean, Parminder's talked about, social and technical solutions, and sometimes we sort of swap them, technical solutions to social problems and the other way around. But I think it's really forcing us to think about what are we even using this in service of. There was a great tweet storm that Arvind Narayanan kicked off about how when he was teaching a class at Princeton, and they were trying to define fairness, people came up with 21 definitions of fairness. How do you encode that? How do computer scientists engage with nebulous ideas that as lawyers and policymakers we're comfortable with having a multiplicity of definitions? How do you code these things into systems? I think all of these have implications for equity. So I think just to end here, I would really urge us as a community to focus on what AI is really adding or subtracting from the social justice conversation, because I think one of my pet peeves is we talk about AI, robotics, big data, analytics, statistics, as if they're all the same thing. I think we have a real sort of paucity and poverty of definitions and vocabulary, but I think we also run the risk when we come at it from different disciplines of mixing them all up and talking about them as if they're the same thing. But I think that's why intersectionality really matters. You need the computer scientists and the lawyers and the humanities people in the same room talking about these. The fact that we're all here, the fact that all kinds of people who've never thought about AI are now suddenly working on AI, speaks to how much of a game changer it is, how transformative it is. I almost think it's such a brain drain or a sort of time sink that all of us are focusing energy on AI when 1 year ago we weren't. Either our sponsors and funders are requiring us to add AI to a proposal for it to look current and interesting, or we feel it's actually touching every aspect of our life, from Siri in our phone to how search engines are optimized, to what images we're shown, to how fake news works. We can't get away from it. So I'll sort of end with one of my favorite quotations from William Gibson, where he talks about the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So I think the sooner we stop talking about AI as if it's some future sort of potential that may or may not happen, and realize it is here, it is now, it is embodied in the devices and products that we use, and it is something that we are part of. It's an ecosystem. Nishant Shah at a Rio conference we recently had talked about saying he didn't like this framing of AI and inclusion or AI and something else, because we are actually part of it. We're within an AI ecosystem. We're actors, we're participants. We may not all have the same agency or choice, but it is an ecosystem that we're all inhabiting. So I think the sooner we recognize that it's here and now and actually start working on solutions and partnerships that will yield real outcomes, I think it would be a great step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Malvika, and I think you added well to Preetham's take that we need to first recognize the opportunity and the great force that it is, and as I said in the opening intervention, it will fundamentally change how all our human systems are organized, from industry to governance to social relationships. So it's very powerful, and it will change it in this manner because it's useful. It's highly efficient, otherwise it wouldn't change it in this manner. But also slightly differing on what would be the role of the policymakers, because there is always a constituency which is highly optimistic about it, because they are the sellers of artificial intelligence, the owners of artificial intelligence. So there has to also be corresponding thinking about what are the problems with overselling of that artificial intelligence, because that balance is also required. And then when you see whether the balance is on this side or the other, you need to make those kind of interventions, because policymakers and social justice activists, of course, always look at power. And if there's a power which is concentrated, there's always an abuse. And we should start talking about what kind of abuse and what should be needed to confront that abuse. If there was abuse in industrial capital getting concentrated, there were problems, and we need to have mitigating policies in the industrial age. There were problems with intellectual property capital getting concentrated. There's a huge amount of work with that. And now there is an intelligence capital which is getting concentrated, which is very useful at the heart of whole human reorganization. But policymakers need to think that what is it that we have to add to what is already being done by the market to promote efficiency, which AI promotes in a manner like nothing does. And to add to what Malvika said, that future is already here. It's not just equally distributed. Some of us like to say that artificial intelligence is so hyper efficient that we may have solved the problem of production. In economics, basically, there are two problems. One is of production, another is distribution. And therefore, since the problem of production would, in theory, have been solved, we should focus a lot on the problem of distribution. And that's what equity and social justice is about. Now, I'll open this discussion to the room to also start talking, yes, sir, talking about the kind of things we need to do. And quickly, I have just 3 things which comes to my mind as a conversation starter about actual things we can do to take control of artificial intelligence to serve social goods. One is whether, since artificial intelligence has some defined targets and tasks which it would have to be doing, and it finds its own ways to do it, whether in critical areas like health, transportation, and so on, the regulators have to reach that level where they could come up and say that these tasks and targets have to be integrated into the core intelligence of a transportation or a health system, so that whenever the artificial machinery works, it does not just maximize the efficiency in that narrow profit-minded manner, but also the social goods. And both Norbert and also Malvika talked about how can we code fairness into it. But I think we need to start figuring out how regulators can code fairness into regulation of AI and give certain targets which have to be part of certain critical systems. Second part, and in this area also there's a lot of research going on, the problem with artificial intelligence systems is that you really do not know why it did these things. And for example, if GDPR, the new EU privacy regulation, which has one provision that you have a right to know from an algorithm how a certain decision was taken, it's simply not applicable in case of artificial intelligence, because the artificial intelligence cannot tell you how a decision has been taken. So whether we would like some part of artificial intelligence to be dedicated to kind of somehow start recording whatever it does, to put in human readable language the logic it uses to take its decision. It may be difficult, but there's a research going on whether this kind of thing can be done, because then we can audit the steps artificial intelligence system took to take some decisions which could be socially unjust, and therefore then audit it back and correct those things. All this may add certain inefficiency to the system, but I think there has to be a trade-off whether we need, better equity and better social outcomes, which could reduce efficiency of artificial intelligence, and that's a decision societies would take. And third issue is that artificial intelligence always tries to centralize. If IGF is being organized, it is better to have one coordination center rather than 3 coordination centers, because if we have to put in 5 units of intelligence in 3 places, it's better to put 15 units of intelligence in 1 place, because it provides better coordination. And that's why you're seeing all digital industries have a high tendency to concentrate. So artificial intelligence has this centralizing tendency, but can we force it to decentralize in certain manners to certain extent, so that even if we have rival platforms, of course, if it's more efficient, if in a city of Geneva, there's a single transport company which owns all the data and would do things more efficiently. If there were 3 transport companies, there would be some sacrificing of efficiency perhaps. But can we force certain amount of decentralization, even at the expense of some efficiency? Whether we can have, for example, AI as a public good in some cases. There is a concept of open AI, which Elon Musk have used. So these are the kind of things we need to start thinking about, and I wanted to contribute these initial points before we start a conversation, and the gentleman there first. And we will take about 5 interventions first, and then decide how we go forward with that. So.
Yes, Boris Engelson, a local and very, very silly journalist freelance. The lady in blue has put her finger on what I consider a crucial question, but alas, a question without answer. Why don't we have, after 2 or 3 centuries of democracy, why haven't we implemented social justice and equity yet? It is not just for lack of robots to help the elderly lady to carry a bag. It is not for lack of data or iPad. It is, as she said, because we have too many definitions of equity and too many definitions of social justice. All the wars and revolutions of the past 2 or 3 centuries are an outcome of too many conflicting visions on what is equity and what is just and what is social. So it may be that robots will be able to fix the thing in tournaments and civil wars between robots, and then we will enjoy the ultimate and best coding. It might create a very boring society. You will experience, I'm too old, but I think that this issue of is artificial intelligence able to supersede the different conflicting views of what is justice, equity, and social.
Thank you, sir. Next, please. Go ahead.
I'd like to thank all the panelists for great, but especially the one who likes my blog. I want to speak, though, to the gentleman on the left, since the first speaker mentioned, sorry for terrible at catching the names. There was this problem that you said AI couldn't, my comment is almost the same, actually. AI can't optimize for social justice because that's not just a number. But this is a problem that we have. Oh, that wasn't you, that was the chair. I'm sorry. Okay. But that was a problem for us in general. We need to define human flourishing better and economics better. And yeah, so as several of the people have said, this is a problem for us in general. I think I'll stop there.
Please.
My name is Jörn Erbgut. I'm a researcher at the University of Geneva. I think we need a lot more education in what kind of systems they are, and then how to apply them and what it means to apply them. Even when the data is unbiased, we can't be sure that a system to whom we don't give any rules will produce the correct rules. It just doesn't work. So if we want to have certain rules, then we have to give it to the system. And this is, of course, a difficult task, because we have to first to define those rules. And if we can't define the rules, we can't expect a nice AI system to define them for us in a correct manner. It just doesn't work.
Thank you, sir. Please.
Hello, I'm Juliana. I'm from Brazil, and I'm here as part of Youth at IGF program. I have a question about the changes in labor force and labor markets. I come from the global south, and most of the job force from my country is unqualified. And artificial intelligence, as was mentioned here so many times, will affect deeply the forms of labor offered in the world. But the unqualified positions will definitely be the first ones to be taken by AI. As a consequence, the workers of the global south will be the first ones to be affected. And as everybody knows here, those workers or the countries where those workers come from will not be the owners of these technologies. Concluding, how can we prevent AI to be more of a factor of inequality between the global north and the global south?
Yes, Martin Schmalzrich from Pamela's Europe. Maybe just a quick provocative answer to the first gentleman. There is an argument that we're not in a democracy. If you look at ancient Greek writers like Aristotle, he considered democracy to be only via sorting. That is, citizens being chosen, by random and not by election. He called democracy the tyranny of the majority. Just a thought, maybe. So that may be a part of the answer. Well, no, you shouldn't, because it's sorting. No, but I think the larger point I had about AI is that it's, and I think you pointed to that, the last point that you made, is it's fine when it's about production, it's about effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity. When it's about decision-making, about human behavior, then we shouldn't use AI at all, I would argue, because the only thing that AI can do is to examine human behavior and simply draw conclusions from that and not from a simulated 100 planets in parallel universes where you design utopian systems and see how that would affect human behavior. So it cannot tell us what is good or what is bad. It just can't. Yeah.
Thank you, Khalid from Germany. And I only want to refer to a previous session held also 2 days ago for artificial intelligence inclusion, because as you said, there are only social solutions to social problems. I don't necessarily agree with that, because we had also the categorization of that we have technical solutions to social problems and social solutions to technical problems. And I try to extend that to that we do also have technical solutions to technical problems and social solutions to social problems. And I only want to refer to the other term. I would not necessarily say that artificial intelligence is the opposite of natural intelligence, because that induces immediately that a 0-1 relation between artificial and natural. But I do think that's much more fuzzy logic than only having a two-side of flip coin.
That comment was meant to refer to the origins of the word artificial intelligence. I totally agree that in practice, how it's going to be used going forward, the powerful applications of artificial intelligence systems will involve humans. It's humans who can make use of it, and they become more powerful or more effective at whatever their task is.
Hello.
Just a minute. You want to say something? No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, to briefly address the point about social problems and technical solutions. I see your point, but the thing is that we should not necessarily look at them separately. And I think Malavika gave an answer to that quite concretely, in the terms that we do not need to look this as separate things. If this is a social construct, we need to look at inclusion and at participation and at agency from within the system. And that involves the use of technology necessarily, but as within our agency as people within the system to change that system to the betterment of all.
Yes, Stefan.
Hello. Okay, I wanted to react to your comment also that artificial intelligence cannot address social justice, because unlike profit, it's not calculable. But we can find metrics of social justice also, like indicator. We can work through metrics. It's like wealth, for instance, it's not calculable, it's not a number, but we address wealth through capital profit. And there are indicators. Simple indicator would be the difference between rich and poor for social justice. The problem is, do we want to quantify everything? So that's another problem. But I think social justice can be calculated.
Come in here, and that's a main point. I think I understand the scientists and technologists are trained to think in that fashion, but we on the social and policy side, we know it's not only what is measurable which is important, but what is important for its own sake, whether it's measurable or not, and we need to figure out a trade-off. We cannot say we will only deal with things which are measurable and rest can go to hell, because the best things in life may not be measurable, but we can still use economics, discipline does it, econometric does it. So these are efforts to figure out some measurability about some important parts of life, because, and even if we lose efficiency because the matrices are not good, some things will still be included because they are the more important things, and that itself is important calculation. You were wanting to say something?
I was only trying to say is that the rise of the cryptocurrencies, which I'm sure nobody has missed out. But if you go back to 2008 and 2009, when Satoshi actually starts doing, or the group of people, which is Satoshi, I do not know who that is, but when they start doing it, it emphasizes this increasing trust in code and technology over human-created systems. The financial institutions, the governments, all the policy, everybody, the economists who actually told us that there is more trust in this rational human being, which also has been destroyed as a theory, had failed everybody. And the bankers had done, and everybody knows what happened in the subprime mortgage cases. They failed us, and there is an increased tendency in large swaths of human population to say, these guys, the tech is predictable. The human judgment is greedy and unpredictable. So the phenomenon we are observing is more and more trust there. And that's why it's easy for the governments to sell the narrative of everything else is subservient to innovation, and that anyway leads to far more predictability in the behavior of their own populations. And anyway, what is democracy? Because if everything is going to be now fine-tuned and changed by algorithms, then everything else is up for the grabs, and the human society is now changing. So that's all I wanted to say, that the larger phenomenon should not be ignored, because that's how many of the people are currently thinking.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. My comments actually somehow related to this, and also following up on the point of innovation. And the financial crisis, because I was wondering to what extent, and this is a question for also all the panelists, if you had some thoughts on how the current economic capitalist pressures that influence the different developments of those, and the AI and how the pressures on the companies, how that influences what types of products that they come up with, and how they shape and how they move around, right? This like the competition between the different companies, that they want to be first, and whether in our reactions and like trying to like come up with solutions and what could be done, whether thinking about different business models or different approaches that are kind of, that go a little bit counter to that, that pressure and like that competition, and something that is maybe a little bit more open, something along the lines of previous initiatives around Creative Commons and like copyleft approaches, if you've had some thoughts and ideas on all of that.
Okay, I'll give you on the panel quickly a minute and a half each at the end of it, but we still have time and
Thank you. It's been fascinating for me listening to this, because everything that I've been reading is warning against the fact that AI reflects the biases that we see in our society. As a woman of color, if you're interacting with a system which has been trained by somebody who is not a woman of color, you can expect that you will pick up some biases. This idea that governments feel that technology is neutral you're coming out and saying they're worried about human systems. They have more faith in tech systems. This is what I heard you saying.
Oh, I actually said the citizenry is now showing more faith in code and tech, not just the governments. And that's why...
Well, I don't know about that. Maybe I read the wrong stuff. Because that's not what I'm feeling at all. I mean, if you look at the discussion, you're looking at major platform companies, the oligarchs, as we call them, and citizenry is becoming more and more nervous about the control.
Oh, I'm with you on that.
Yes. No, but if you talk about algorithms and their control over data and over your lives, you're talking about AI as well. You know, so I think that I was getting some contradictory signals from what was being said on the panel. But essentially, we see the systems that we have created will reflect who we are. And we haven't got to the stage yet where we can insulate them from that.
Thank you. And I just want to add one point, because that's the political economy, and we try to bring a political economy approach to it. People talk about biases, but it's not just biases, because biases look like something which, if I'm given the right information, I'll correct. There are also interests embedded in AI, and interests are different from biases. Interests are deliberate, biases are not deliberate. And we like to talk only about biases as if everybody had the right information, they'll correct themselves. But here, interests are integrated by the controllers of the technology, and that's...
Let me just make one more point. Sorry, I forgot. The point on innovation. What I've been reading is innovation is dangled out as the reward for no regulation in this space. So I see that as being a company narrative, you know, big business narrative, to leave them in peace. I don't see that necessarily as a developing country narrative, which is what I was getting from you.
Oh, that's one thing which I will actually disagree. The other things I am with you. I think you're right. For a longest time, it was dangled as the innovative thing. But what has happened now, the government narrative has bought into it. The public-private partnerships, I'll tell about my own government, where I come from, India, where it's been now the data-based innovation is the biggest thing which most governments now want to bank upon. Look at the countries like the Republic of China. A very different, of course, a very different economy, a very different political structure, but everybody now wants a share in what tech-based innovation, which is going to be riding on the wave of data, is able to offer their citizens. The price may be democracy, and the price may be various other values which we may hold very dear to us after all the struggle. But innovation is not just being now used by companies. It's very interesting, but yes, they would also like to move fast and break things. India has a biometric database, which we are ready to export to everybody else because we think we are very innovative. And every other concern, whether it's data protection or privacy, et cetera, becomes somewhat of a difficulty or an inconvenient issue. So it's happening.
So yeah, before I go to the questions, people who have been silent on the panel, if they want to make any points, they can do it. I'll give you the opportunity right after this question. The person 3 short of the last one, yeah, you.
Me.
And then the last one.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up a comment made by the chair as you were, in a sense, summing up what the panel was saying as they first finished speaking, which was about the concentration of power. And I think that's an extremely important issue to have on the table. You mentioned the concentration of power in terms of, historically, in terms of a number of episodes in human history. You can see it obviously in capital, as you mentioned, but also in terms of control of land before that, and the backlash always being towards demand for accountability and towards some kind of redistribution of, in a sense, perhaps articulated through access to resources, but in itself it's about actually perhaps a redistribution of power itself, manifested through redistribution of resources in some way. And I think that's an important point to hold on to, because I think some of these issues appear to take the analysis what happens in terms of the concentration of power out of the equation, make it into something, in a sense, apparently non-ideological, such as efficiency, apparently non-ideological, such as innovation and technological achievement. And in fact, these concepts are fundamentally ideological concepts as well. I mean, efficiency is an ideological concept. I mean, we can want to do things better, but what we define as how we do it better is, in a sense, that is, how we approach that is a human value that's being put on it, with power embedded within it. So I do think that the conversations around AI, if they do not embed this kind of very fundamental, in a sense, analysis around the political economy in which it's operating, or is reproducing, and I think the important, it's not just reflection, is reproduction, and change in terms of decision making through AI systems. If there isn't accountability in some way embedded into it, then or rather we need to think about how to embed accountability into it amidst all the very positive elements that there are in AI.
Malvika?
I need to go to another session, so I'm going to be very quick. I think, sort of picking up on your point, one thing I wanted to say was, what expectations do we have of AI? Do we want it to accurately reflect reality? Are we imposing an aspirational element of it being better than reality, because reality is messy and screwed up and biased? So do we expect technology to actually deliver us from that and actually give us something better? And in doing so, how do we do that? And are we going to run up against all the problems we've had with attempts to do affirmative action and the backlashes that result from that? So are there good ways to do that? I think that's a very fruitful exercise for this community to say, what does that look like? Who are the actors? Who gets to sort of shape that discourse? Because, I mean, we've seen it with sort of, Me Too, with every other campaign where we talk about, where we sort of surface discrimination, that there's always this backlash. So what is a good way for AI to actually help with that? And like Parminder was talking about, if it's a data issue, we know how to counter that. If we know the slice of data we're dealing with is not representative, there are techniques to actually, normalize for that and actually make the data more representative. So I think there are things. I think one of the ways, I think a lot of our discourse in this space focuses very heavily on forms of AI that are data intensive. But there are techniques like reinforcement learning that actually function in a vacuum of data and humans, where the system learns against itself, like AlphaGo Zero, the new variation, which didn't learn from exposure to lots of old Go games. It learned by playing against itself. So does something like that, which is not so reliant on data, does it help us actually escape some of these questions of bias? And should we, of course, it'll throw up inevitably new questions of social justice that don't come up from the data perspective, but they could be solutions to some of the data questions. And just to end, I wanted to say that, we talk about transparency as sort of one of the big goals here, but should we be actually looking for proxies where a system isn't scrutable or algorithmic, explainability isn't possible because a system wrote a system which God help you if you know how it actually works? Are there proxies for fairness? Are there other things we can look at? Are there ways that you can audit it? And who actually audits these systems? Are there other sort of accountability measures that can work with transparency where transparency falls short, and where it's not imposing burdens on the users and the victims, but can actually put some pressure on players and at the design level? So I wish we could talk about this for hours, but I need to go, and thank you.
Thank you, Malvika. Thank you for coming. I know she was rushing to another workshop. She will leave us now, and the person at the end, and then Yusuf. So.
Hi, Johnny Penn, University of Cambridge. I like the expression, the poverty of vocabulary, and I just wanted to add, for what it was worth, a shout out for the historians of technology who are trying to chart some of the history of how we've arrived at this point and unpack the ideology behind things like efficiency. You can Google the maintainers or go to maintainers.org to see some of their work, and it's trying to offer counterbalance to move fast and break things, and by saying move slow and fix things, and offering maintaining technology and the influence that has over a society as a kind of counterbalance to the idea that innovation drives progress, or that progress is all that important. Also, quick practicality thing, from my view, I think the on-ramp for data literacy for civil society is still pretty, you know, these would be actually good problems to have. I don't see many civil society groups with the budget to capture data, to know what to do with data. And I just want to echo a point made by a woman over here about the need to maybe congregate around data policy. You know, we're in the United Nations. This is a place where people meet to discuss best practices. Is there an equivalent to the United Nations for data that civil society can gain by working together? Yeah, and this is a wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Yusuf.
Thank you. I just wanted to go into the distinction between AI and blockchain. They are not the same, they are the opposite. AI, don't trust it. There are no rules. It's just learning by example and making up their own rules. It learns your examples, and everything between those examples is just interpolation, which might be good or might not be good. Blockchain, on the other hand, is very simple. It's clear rules. Everything is transparent, and you can trust it. That's what it's made for. So AI for complex problems, blockchain for simple problems, but trust. So we need really to look at what kind of technology we are looking at and see where we can employ it and where we can't. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree that basically it's not technology. Somebody said there are technical solutions. I think definitionally a solution is social. It cannot be technical, but we can get into that definitions later on. But I think technologies contribute to making new institutions and new social systems. As you were saying, there are complex technologies and less complex technologies, and combining them together, we can make financial systems, we can make governance systems, we can make other kind of data systems, which kind of carry forward our social objectives. And depending on what our social objectives are, we can combine different kind of technologies. So I think social is always ahead of technologies, and I can't see anything being technical being ahead of social, but that is a long discussion many disciplines enter into. So are there any other inputs? Otherwise, I go back to the panel. Anybody wants to make last two interventions? Yeah, so yeah, we have 6 minutes. So if nobody else is speaking, a quick one, and I'll go back to the panel. And the panelists can start from there and choose whatever points they want to speak about, just about a minute each left.
Well, thank you very much. I'm neuroprogrammer. I just have a question. Who is going to push AI or artificial consciousness developers or developers of bots, the companies, to be more transparent in their softwares? So if UN has not yet consensus a definition of bioethical artificial consciousness, this is going to be cyber unsafe either if we have a robot like Sophia robot speaking in the UN or making decisions or participating.
Thank you. So I would first give chance to those speakers who did not intervene during the interventions, about a minute each, Preetham, then Norbert, and then Carlos, please. And then Mishi and myself, if there is any time left.
Okay, thanks. So hearing the conversation, some of these issues have come up so many times that, at least according to me, I think there is a need to demystify AI. For example, I heard Parminder say, and that's largely true, that AI is a black box, you don't know what it's doing. So it's very difficult to kind of trace it. So putting my technology hat, that's true for neural nets and deep learning algorithms. It's a particular kind of AI. But there are Bayesian networks, there are decision trees. Decision tree, by definition, it is a tree. So when you train the algorithm, you can actually see, you can print it out as a tree. Support vector machines, Kth nearest neighbor, clustering algorithms. There are different classes of algorithms where traceability is not that difficult, And these kinds of algorithms are used for natural language processing, for speech recognition. It was hidden Markov, but even that could be traced. So let's not put everything in one basket and say that we don't know what's happening. let's understand what the different techniques are, what the technology is, and then try to figure out a solution for everything. Because then, or else the worry is you're always aiming for a doomsday scenario, and you're always concerned without knowing what you're concerned about. So it's just a general point I'm making, and I just wanted to close by re-quoting Tim Cook, whom I heard at the Wuhan conference in China the week before last, I think. And he said something along the lines of, he's not worried about machines thinking like humans. He's more worried about humans thinking like machines. So I'll just leave it out there.
Yes, very briefly to end. Yes, there is a strong urge to out-innovate and to outpace the rest. And the inefficiencies of democracy or taking values into account tend to slow down those processes, so they become barriers for states and for capital, for power in general, to promote this kind of growth without caring about the distribution of the growth. However, we were not going to stop that necessarily by just mentioning it. And it's important then to be involved in those processes. Malavika and Mishi have mentioned that. So to encourage participation in the design and in requesting transparency and accountability and updating mechanisms is necessary, but it's all within the larger framework of society trying to make better conditions for itself. It's good to participate in that standard setting because that sets the rules for the game for the future. However, because this is the reality now, it's a current call upon now to be participants in those processes without leaving aside all the other questions that appeared during the panel about democracy, about being participants, about highlighting some values and bringing them into these conversations, and also to contest and challenge and correct the results of the use of technology when that might not go towards what we consider as social justice. Thank you.
I would like to highlight one point, which is a difference between social justice and social justice indicators, which of course each are an important aspect, and I believe it also addresses the question asked at the very end, at least to some extent. I'm going to quote from one of the major human rights treaties, Article 25A of the ICCPR. Every citizen shall have the right and opportunity to take part in the conduct of public affairs. And defining what an AI algorithm should do is becoming, at least for the big applications, a matter of public affairs. So we have the right, we must demand our human rights to take part in these public affairs. We need to see at the decision-making table where that is decided. That's not just for the techies and those big companies, it's for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert. Mishi, we both have still time, about half a minute.
I just want to say that I agreed with Preetham about what is the segregation and the triage and understanding of terms is a little important. But I do want to concentrate on one simple thing. I think in future when we look at, it's not just the lower skilled labor which is seeing at least a little bit of changes in what the new jobs will bring, but it's also at the very expert level, which requires kind of precision. And there's a lot of other kind of benefits which are coming up. You all saw perhaps Kepler, the new exoplanet, which we discovered 2 days ago with the help of Google Neural Network. These are great benefits which we have. It's for the first time after the Industrial Revolution, we exactly can predict which are the kind of injuries we have when production happens and can make work safer. And also about education, just to make education effective, which I think has been an endeavor of the human society, which will ultimately lead to all kinds of benefits later on. To make schooling more effective, edX is already doing it, and proprietary software companies like Coursera are already deploying it, but it's also time to do it for ourselves and our schools, which is the benefit coming out of it. I cannot emphasize enough that more participation, or at least even an attempt to understand all the issues, just makes it a little more better than somebody just telling you the top-down approach, that this is how the tech works. It said, I think Mozilla's health report of internet says 52% of the websites on the internet are in English, but only 25% of the world's population speaks English. And that also tells you the disparity between what is now being taught to us compared to what we want to learn. And let it not come as a later afterthought of Band-Aid, that this is the kind of policy you would like, but just participation, talking, and getting interested and improving our own education.
Thank you, Mishi. Thank you, everybody. We may not have been able to answer some of the questions, but the questions were important inputs in themselves. Thank you very much for a very participative walk out here. I just want to add to what Mishi said, that we want to continue this work. We do not want equity and social justice to be a residual addition to when the new digital systems around artificial intelligence have been set up. We want these to be a part of the design, and we are in formative phases of an artificial intelligence-powered society. And therefore, we want to carry on this dialogue, whether we are able to code social justice or not, or do it inefficiently, or in doing so, reduce the efficiencies of the systems a bit, which I always think it does happen, but we should have to take that trade-off. So we want to continue this dialogue. Those who are interested in continuing this dialogue can either go to JustNet Coalition website or IT for Change website, and there is a general email ID there, and write to us. We would carry on as a group trying to figure out and bring it back to the next IGF, possibly also as a dynamic coalition, but in some kind of a grouping which will carry on an effort to see that equity and social justice is part of the new systems and not added to them later on. And thank you, everybody, and thank you, the panelists, so much. You did it before I did it.
Now you do it, because until the chair does
it's
it.
over.
But Preetham says until you say it, it doesn't matter.
The meeting is closed.
And I know I would not speak because before I came to the room, it seemed you said more or less the same in a more articulate.
Not at all, sir. Very much good contribution. And I think democracy is achieving a lot. For a poor country like India, also we are social justice activities. We see, nothing is perfect, but it does achieve.
But from the further question, I got that you had more or less the same position as I did, or partly.
Thank you. It's
no,
always
but it's, I am not your inspirator, it's vice versa.
No, that's good to know. Some overlaps. That's good enough. Thank you so much, sir.
So this was the last thing. Yeah, I need to pick up the kid and then go.
Yeah, I have this.
I don't.
That's all right.
But I'm in ITU, so now you just have to
Round
walk
around.
across.
Roger,
You just have to walk across.
I'm Kareem Persat. I keep getting emails from you.
Okay, you are with.
And then you're
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
And I'm sorry, we've begun at the OECD work on AI, and I would be very interested in having the perspective and your input and vice versa. Because
Don't have my card, so I'll apologize.
our work is focusing more on measurement and really the economics, the employment, the labor policies, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I know.
The hardcore economic stuff.
Yeah, it's good because I'm working in the digital economy area as well.
So I can put in touch with Socio, which is also publishes news articles.
We're missing that.
Media, yeah, because I do read. So I can put you in touch with.
Happy anytime. I'd like to you can set up a email. Thank you so much.
The head of media.
Nice to meet you too. If you're interested, we're going to have a panel next about just the beginning of our work.
Now here?
Yeah.
No, where is the panel?
Right here.
What is the panel?
AI, we called it Intelligent Machine Smart Policies.
Okay, I'm going to stay half an hour because I have a meeting at 5 o'clock, but I'll stay half an hour.
Okay, fantastic.
Huh? Yeah. No, at 5 o'clock I have a JustNet Coalition meeting. Yeah, so what I will talk here now.
Parminder, so I'll see you next
thanks so
time.
much for coming here.
Maybe in
It was
January.
very useful.
No, my pleasure. It's in January. And we will also talk about the conference.
Yeah. After you come back, we talk about it. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Would it be possible to add a bill for
Yeah, you can come over. That's okay. Just as members meeting at 5 o'clock. We just talk at the booth, the JustNet Coalition booth. You have seen the booth areas? If you go far in, and facing the other side, there's a JustNet Coalition. At 5 o'clock, we are getting together. You come over. We'll talk about it. Hang on. Oh yeah, okay. Nice to meet you. I have written a few times for IT Watch. Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Thank you so much. So you're covering the IGF?
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay. Good. Okay. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Sorry, I need to clear this.
Nice to meet you. It's nice to share.
Good.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. So, Joanna, thank you for joining us today.
Because we're just beginning. If I see an aspect of it, tell me after. What do you want me to say? Next to Wonky. You're first. You're first and you're going to have the definition. Yeah, you're there. I'm here. Yeah. All right. Okay. I think I'll grab some more water. Yeah, me too.
Oh, Vice Minister. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Yes. So, Karen, where Vice Minister was there?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I know that. So, why Vice Minister would you sit over there? So, because you will leave after your presentation. Okay. Yeah.
I should be at the end because we'll have to leave quite quickly.
Okay.
I'm going to serve some water in the order that you like.
So, Karen.
Yes.
Could you help them to find out their seats?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Anywhere. Joanna's there, and we might have some more. I don't know how.
Yeah. Vice Minister, please. Caroline, we have seat over there, so I think.
I don't know if we have enough seats again. Some challenges are happening.
Wow. We have a seating problem. Yes. Yes. The order of presentation will be Vice Minister first, and then we'll have Joanna will go second. No. Caroline will go second, and Joanna will follow. And Caroline, you, and then Karen, and Mark. Yes, you're with us. Do we have enough seats? So I think, Mark, you will be the last, and the Vice Minister will leave. So yeah, you can take his seat when he leaves. So we need one more seat. Yeah.
Oh, no. Are you sure? Okay, thank you.
I learned my lesson.
I keep on leaving.
Okay. And I met Cassie yesterday at our meeting, and I just briefly told her that we had a very good kind of consensus. Yeah. And she said she may leave today, I think.
Yeah, she was. I think she left this morning.
Okay, thank you.
Is this you? Jen, is this you?
I was told to sit there.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me move.
I don't know. I was told to sit there. I don't know.
Karen, could you?
I will move wherever you want
Where
me to
is
go.
Karen?
Could you just run out the door?
Please take your
Oh,
seat.
rats. I
Yeah.
forgot my water. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Is there a problem?
I just went to get water and then I left it somewhere.
So I think Karen, yes, Vice Minister. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
When are we going to start? Can I go back and get my water? I left it in the bathroom.
Yeah, you will be actually.
No, but do I have 2 minutes before you start?
Yes, I have.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Yeah. Good afternoon. It's 4:40, so we should begin. And welcome to the OECD workshop on AI, intelligent machine, and smart policies. And
we have great panels today, and we only have 90 minutes on this important topic. You all know that the AI is getting into our daily lives, from book recommendation to autonomous vehicle. So with that kind of rapid progress of AI also gets more attention from the policy area. And many governments and international organizations are working on this agenda item. And OECD itself actually had 2 conferences, international conferences on AI. Last October, OECD had a conference in Paris, and year 2016, thanks to the support of the Japanese Ministry of Interior Affairs and Communication, OECD had a conference in Tokyo. And this workshop itself is co-organized with the Japanese Ministry of Interior and Communications. And I would like to say thanks to the Vice Minister to support the organization of this event. And we have great panel with us today. And because we do have only 90 minutes, we would like to focus on the policy agenda, policy priorities on AI today. And if you would like to make comments on other relevant issues on AI, I think please keep that on next occasions. So today, we'll focus on the issues related with policy. And first, I would like to invite the Vice Minister Dominika, Vice Minister for Policy Coordination at the Japanese Ministry of International Affairs and Communications, and he will provide an overview of ministry's work to consider AI's impact on society and public policy response that is needed to ensure that AI benefits people widely. Vice Minister, please.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, it is my great pleasure to have a speech in this session. We, the government of Japan, would like to pay our highest respect to the OECD's tremendous achievements. We especially appreciate Mr. Wong Kim for giving a very thought-provoking speech on recent OECD activities on artificial intelligence, or AI. Today, I would like to take this opportunity to talk about an effort in Japan to address the socio-economic, ethical, and legal issues associated with AI. Next, please. First of all, I would like to explain the background. As you know, research and development and the use of AI have been rapidly advancing in recent years. They are expected to progress dramatically in years to come. Along with this development, AI systems will be connected to each other over the internet or other networks. We call it AI networking, and it will evolve in the future. Enormous benefits are expected to humans as well as the society and the economy, such as AI's significant contributions to solving various problems that individual local community, countries, and the international community are confronted with. But there are also some risks associated with AI, such as lack of transparency in the judgment and loss of control. From the viewpoint of promoting the benefits as well as mitigating the risks, it is necessary to address relevant social, economic, and ethical and legal issues. In particular, services which use AI systems will be provided beyond national borders via networks. It is essential to have international discussions to deal with such issues. Next, please. Recently, there have been a lot of discussions on social, economic, and ethical and legal issues of AI around the world. Here on this map are some of them. There are activities by private sector groups such as the IEEE and the Partnership on AI and the Future Life Institute. There are also studies at the government level, such as one by the White House. Furthermore, discussions at international fora are going on. Next, please. I would like to show you some of the international discussions. Last year, Japan hosted the G7 ICT Ministers meeting in Takamatsu. The then Minister Sanae Takaichi proposed that the G7 countries take the lead in the international discussions toward the formulation of AI R&D guidelines, which are guidelines that AI developers should take into consideration in terms of promoting the benefits and mitigating risks for the society and the economy. The G7 ministers agreed to her proposal. Next, please. At this year's meeting in Italy, the G7 ICT and industry ministers continued the discussion about AI and issued the ministers' declaration. It embraced the importance of AI, saying, "We recognize that AI could bring immense benefits to our economies and societies. We share the vision of human-centric AI, which drives innovation and growth in the digital economy. And we believe that all stakeholders have a role to play in fostering and promoting an exchange of perspectives." Next, please. Moreover, as Mr. Min already explained a few minutes ago, the OECD held the conference on AI in Paris this October with Japan's Minister of Internal Affairs and Communications. I, as a participant, felt that we had many useful and fruitful exchanges of views about various aspects of AI, including policy matters. Next, please. Different groups and organizations in the world are now discussing aspects of social, economic, ethical, and legal issues of AI from their perspectives. Today, I would like to show you a study and a discussion conducted in Japan. In 2016, my ministry established an advisory expert group to study social, economic, ethical, and legal issues toward promoting AI networking. It has dozens of members from industry, academia, and the private sectors. Next, please. One thing the conference is doing is to assess the socio-economic impact on AI networking. This is an excerpt of the conference's annual report this year. It assessed an impact, mainly benefits, as well as the risks of AI networking. There are two types of assessment. One, preliminary assessment from the viewpoint of AI developers, and two, assessment by use field from the viewpoint of AI users. Each assessment is conducted in several areas based on scenario analysis for specific use scenes. Next, please. The conference made several suggestions from the scenario analysis. I will show you some typical ones among them. First, although independent AI systems have positive impact, collaboration among various AI systems may bring much more significant impact. Second, while employment opportunities in some business fields may decrease, transfer of employees to higher value-added positions or the creation of new employment opportunities is expected. Third, throughout the different use cases, you can find common risks, and it is important to deal with them. Next, please. Some people are afraid that as more AI systems or robots are used, humans will be replaced and may lose their jobs. On this employment issue, the conference made some suggestions. For example, while some workers might be affected by the spread of AI, prompt response to employment opportunities to be newly created is important, as well as education and human resource development of job seekers for the smooth transition to the new opportunities. Next, please. Another thing the conference has done is to formulate the draft of AI R&D guidelines. They are guidelines for developers prepared for international discussions, such as ones at meetings of G7 ministers and the OECD. Next, please. The basic philosophies of the draft AI R&D guidelines are these 5 items. In particular, the first one, achieving a human-centered society, is very important, as many other relevant groups have pointed out. The second item, sharing the guidelines are non-binding soft law and their best practices among stakeholders internationally, is also important. In particular, I'd like you to know that by saying non-binding soft law, the conference does not intend to regulate AI. The core impact of the guidelines is AI R&D principles. There are 9 principles that developers of AI should take into consideration, which are collaboration, transparency, controllability, safety, security, privacy, ethics, user assistance, and accountability. Next, please. This slide shows which each of the principles means, what each of the principles means. For example, the first principle, the principle of collaboration, is that AI developers should pay attention to the interconnectivity and interoperability of AI systems. Also, the second principle, the principle of transparency, is that AI developers should pay attention to the verifiability of input-outputs and of AI systems and explainability of their judgments. I think these 9 principles can be helpful when you consider AI's social, economic, ethical, and legal issues. So I hope they will be shared among international stakeholders. Next, please. The draft AI R&D guidelines are mentioned in the final document of this year's G7 ICT and Industry Ministers meeting in Italy as an example of events to foster exchange of views on AI. From now on, it is necessary to have further information sharing and discussions to deepen our understanding of the multifaceted opportunities and challenges brought by AI, as this G7 document emphasizes. I hope today's discussion, as well as information sharing in this IGF session, will help deepen your understanding of the opportunities and challenges that AI will bring. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Vice Minister, and thanks again for the support of the Japanese Ministry of Interior and Communications, support on the work of AI in the OECD. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Karim Prasad, economist at the OECD, and ask her to provide an overview of the work that the OECD is beginning on the AI. Karim, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the OECD's emerging work on AI. AI has risen to the, can I change slides? Can you change slides? AI has risen to the top of the policy agenda for many of the OECD member countries, and as well as non-member countries, and many of our stakeholder groups. So this slide shows just a few of the budding initiatives, but there are many more. And AI is important to the OECD because of its very strong impact on economic and social well-being, and impact on things like productivity, employment, business models, things that the OECD cares about, as well as affecting societies in terms of inequality and well-being, and many other aspects. Next slide, please. So the OECD, and as Mr. Tominaga said, under the leadership of Japan, has begun an international and multi-stakeholder dialogue to examine some of the economic and social impacts of AI in a kind of a structured manner, both the good implications and the bad ones, or the less good ones, rather. And the idea of the work at this stage is to take stock of who is doing what and the similarities and differences that are emerging. And early next year, we begin the analytical work, also looking at ways, and that's kind of the bread and butter of the OECD, looking at ways that we can measure some of the impacts of AI. And then based on this analytical work and stock taking, as well as measurement, if we manage to get some solid measurements, then we might work on high-level principles for AI to help guide the development of AI. Some sort of very high-level non-binding framework that can help governments sort of provide a checklist of things to consider when you're developing a policy in this area. what I'd like to do now is just give a brief overview of a recent and very successful conference we held a couple of months ago, and that's informing our work moving forth. So the specificity of this event, could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, the specificity of this event compared to other events is that it brought together many of the different policy, public policy areas. So not just the part that focuses on digital economy policy, but also the ones that focus on employment policy and that bring together labor ministries and their stakeholder groups, which are different, which include trade unions and things like that. We also had education ministry, data protection agencies throughout member and non-member countries, consumer protection authorities, science ministries, and then space agencies, just to name a few, because AI impacts so many different areas of policy that coordinated sort of approach and vision is essential to, we can't look at one area in isolation from the others. So we kicked off the event with a keynote video address by Grand Chess Master Garry Kasparov, and this was funny because he told us that he claims to be the first knowledge worker to have his job displaced by AI when he lost the match against Deep Blue 20 years ago. Compared to, I mean, a few things that came out of that conference was that compared to other technologies, many were surprised by the speed at which, how fast AI has been diffusing and transforming human life just in the past few years, with in particular, and this has been mentioned in many events at this IGF, in particular with deep learning software that learns from data to recognize patterns, and that applications that sounded like sci-fi just a few years ago are now already or will very soon be part of our daily lives. I can't wait for the driverless cars. But smart shopping assistants, translation, speech recognition, etc., even very, very, very precise mapping information. So we discussed the promises. We tried to have a balance between looking at the promises of AI, and the economic and social promises are tremendous, but also looking then at the risks, and the idea would be to not to maximize what the benefits we get, but also control the risks, mitigate the risks, and minimize them, and try to find ways to address those. So we discussed the promises of by AI allowing us to discern very complex patterns, detect irregularities, or any variations from normal patterns, and allocating resources efficiently in fields like health, transportation, or security, but many other sectors. Could I have the next slide, please? And so we dug into a few specific applications. Next slide. Specific applications, and had a focus on applications in the areas of space and space data, as well as AI in the use of AI used for scientific discovery to accelerate scientific discovery and basically revolutionize the way the scientific process takes place. So it was quite fascinating. And then we also discussed a few more unusual applications, like this project. Next slide, please. This project by Google Arts and Culture, where machine learning finds similarities between art exhibits from thousands of museums, galleries, and institutions worldwide, and that's a fantastic application. It's just amazing. I advise everyone to go have a look. So we, of course, we had a full day on policy concerns, challenges for policymakers as AI penetrates economies and societies. A major focus was jobs and skills, where AI capacities already match or exceed human performance in many areas, and the capacities are growing very fast. We released a recent publication that's begun to measure computer skills compared to adult skills that we usually measure for adults, a so-called PIAC study. And we found that only 11% of adults are actually above AI skill level in literacy skills. And so the measurement, that's just the beginning of measurement work, but we need to measure this. We need to find ways to measure exactly what we're talking about to find solutions and or mitigate or take advantage of the opportunities as well. So concerns also include very strongly accentuating inequality and the distributional aspects with potential massive unemployment, technological unemployment, downward impact on wages, not just long-term, but also in the very short term in some industries. For example, we dove into the trucking industry, and there were very strong concerns that this could take place in just the coming 5 years. And also with potential competition concern and centralization of power. Then privacy was again a big issue with the data protection authorities participating, and that conversation focused on transparency of algorithms, access to data, and the governance more broadly of platform businesses. Safety, responsibility, and liability. I'm almost done. These are each topic is a very large topic, so just to go over them in just a few minutes is difficult, but the concerns were raised by algorithm-powered decisions that impact people directly, and there was debate on the different roles of stakeholders, including software developers, hardware providers, the owner of the device or of the algorithm, and then in some cases the driver or the operator of the machinery, and transparency and explainability were also huge issues. So some of the common threads that emerged from the event was the need for international analysis and benchmarking of social and ethical implications of AI technologies. There was a really strong willingness to engage by the OECD and by the OECD with other groups and vice versa for this such multi-stakeholder cooperation and dialogue with the business, the governments, of course, with the business community very strongly, and we have representatives here today, Carolyn from Microsoft, as well as more technologists organizations like the IEEE. The EU, the G7 and G20 are also we're also cooperating, beginning close cooperation with those groups, and so with that, I believe. Thank you very much, and that's a short introduction.
Thanks, Karen. As Karen mentioned, we had an excellent conference last October in Paris on AI, and we had great speakers. And our next speaker is one of those great speakers we had at the October conference. Dr. Joanna Brisson is reader at the University of Bath in the UK and affiliate at the Center for Information Technology Policy at Princeton University. Joanna will present the viewpoint of an AI researcher and ethical issues raised by AI. Joanna, please.
All right, thank you very much. I'm not sure if I should really use slides for this because maybe I'll just sort of talk, but I'll keep advancing my slides so that I can keep track. And so if you want to look, you can try, but don't worry about the slides, okay? So the first thing I was going to do is define intelligence, and I know that we've done this a lot. So, oh, you can see. So intelligence is doing the right thing at the right time. Sorry, let me go back to where we were. Okay. So intelligence is doing the right thing at the right time in a dynamic environment. So we don't want to say the chairs are doing the right thing at the right time and they're done, right? It's something about agility. And I use this very simple minimalist definition. Well, you'll see. It'll be useful later. Okay. So if you're going to do the right thing, you need to be able to perceive the current context. You need to be able to have a set of actions that you can perform. And then what commonly gets thought of in psychology as intelligence is how you associate these two things. One of the things artificial intelligence has taught us is that it's not that easy to detect contexts or to learn how to do things like juggle and balance and throw and run. The actions are hard too. So all three of these things are hard. So the next thing I was going to say, obviously, if you are looking at the slides, is that general intelligence is a complete myth. And the reason it's a complete myth is because finding the right thing to do at the right time is actually a matter of search, and search is challenged by something called combinatorics. So combinatorics is a computer science term to describe a problem that we'll see if we can visualize here. Imagine you had a robot that could only do two things, right? What you've just seen is that you're skipping ahead, even though you can only do two things, in only four, well, I can't do the arithmetic in my head while I'm standing here, but if you only in a few steps, you've got huge numbers. If it was 100 things, in 2 steps, you'd have 10,000 possible plans. And the point is, it seems simple, but you go from here to here in 9 months, right? That's incredible. There's more games of 35, there's more 35 move games of chess than there are atoms in the universe. And when people are worried about, omniscience, about a single breakthrough that suddenly will have perfect intelligence, artificial general intelligence is a confounding of 2 ideas. One is that some algorithm will give us perfection. That's not going to happen because intelligence is dependent on computation, and computation is a physical process. It's not math. So it takes time, it takes space, and it takes energy. And therefore, we can get faster and faster at searching, but we'll never know everything. And the thing about the 35 move games of chess taking up more atoms than there are in the universe, even if we could search all that, where would we put it, right? So it's time and space are issues, and I think I just said this, right? So how is it that we get so smart? How is it that we can play chess in this situation? How is it that humans are so smart? It's because we exploit what's already been done, all right? So machine learning is exploiting the search that humans have already done. That's why we're able to train it. And actually, that's why we're so smart. That's why we're so different from the other apes. We are also exploiting the history that has happened before us. That's how we're dominating the ecosystem, is we've gotten really good at communicating results between humans, all right? And one of the ways that I've proved this is, demonstrated, not proved, this work that you may have heard about, and we'll leave it for Q&A, but we showed that the implicit biases that humans show about expecting what's normally considered sexist or racist things. In this example, it's that women are more associated with domestic things and men more associated with careers. Well, first of all, those same things that humans show, we can find them by looking at word embeddings, which is just standard machine learning representations drawn from text on the web. And not only can we find the same biases that everyone thought was horrible in humans, also those exact same biases are almost perfectly correlated with the actual truth about what jobs women have. So the graph on the left, the y-axis is the expectations of these biased machine learning elements, and the x-axis is the US labor statistics for a bunch of words. So the words are words like programmer, doctor, nurse. And you can see that it's almost perfectly correlated, 90% correlated, and that's despite the fact we had to do some weird scraping to get that data. Let me point out that this also shows what has been mentioned in the previous session, that the web is very biased towards America because not everybody has those same gender distributions on their jobs. All right, so I want to point out that this does not imply that AI is a human or moral subject. I want to confirm what was said earlier, that we need to be human-centered. Just because, well, first of all, what is ethics? Ethics is a way that society defines and governs itself, ensuring some kind of group-level stability for the society. AI and ethics are both authored. There is no necessary position that AI fits into ethics, because we can change AI so it will fit our ethics, or we can change our laws and put AI around them. And the reason I bring up the somewhat complicated case is because, next build please, the next couple builds. There was a proposal in the European Parliament to talk about having legal agency for AI, to make it a legal person. The only reason that legal personhood works for corporations, to the extent that it does work for corporations, is because humans are behind them, and humans are the ones who get sanctioned, so the executive board of the company, right? Nope, no, sorry. All right, so so my point is that, well, I will go ahead. How much time do I have left? Do you want me to stop or continue? Okay, all right, okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah, so what are people for? Okay, we will go ahead and do the next slide. Some people, I very much worry about this. There's people who want AI to replace us, to be our new children. And I also hear, unfortunately, sometimes in the corridors of power, a discussion that there's a permanent separation of those with money and those that do not have it. We can't just displace humans. I think here we hear people talking quite openly. We want to help all people. But I'm going to give you a functionalist reason for that, all right? First of all, it doesn't make sense to replace us with AI. All of our values are based around things that help humans. Even our aesthetics are about helping a group of apes coordinate, right? But I'm going to skip the next slide. Should I skip this one too? I want to get to this slide. Yeah, sorry, the next slide after that. Next one after that. Keep going. You got it? All right. So what are people for, right? One of the things that we know in biology is the more variation you have, the more robust you are. So where does innovation come from? It comes from having a lot of people that have very different educations, very different backgrounds. It's called Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection. If you're machine learning, you should know it, okay? So it's not okay for us either to restrict people using AI and box them into little things, or to replace a bunch of people with a single algorithm. And I would argue that's also one of the reasons you get fake news. When you have a single algorithm, it's easy to learn how to get around it. If you have hundreds of people that are editing your news, you're not likely to get around all of them, and you have a better chance for a whistleblower as well. So I'm gonna stop here because I think I ran a little long. We can talk about employment later.
Thanks, Joanna. I think definitely we'll have an opportunity to discuss employment issue. So thank you. Now I would like to invite our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Caroline Nguyen. She is the Director of Technology Policy at Microsoft, and she will provide the business viewpoint of the opportunities and challenges of AI. And she also introduced the famous partnership on artificial intelligence to benefit people and society. Caroline?
Great, thank you so much, Wonky, and also thank you to the to OECD for enabling me to take part within this very important dialogue on artificial intelligence. I've titled my talk, Realizing the Promise of Artificial Intelligence. So let's first talk about what is that promise. From our perspective, there's a huge economic promise in the sense that recent research has estimated that AI could double annual economic growth rate by the year of 2035 for some developed countries, and boost labor productivity by up to 40%. So there's about 12 countries that were cited by the report for the U.S. It's a growth rate of 2.6 to 4.6%, or a cumulative increase of up to $8.3 trillion in gross value added to the economy. One of the reasons for starting the discussion with this is because at the IGF, it's really important to talk about how ICT can enable realization of the SDGs. And within the UN agencies, there's an embracement already of AI as an accelerator for realizing the 2030 agenda. So, however, one of the things that I do want to emphasize is that the future doesn't just happen, right? And at the IGF, with opportunities like this, where we have the opportunity to sit down and share, have conversations with multi-stakeholders, through dialogue such as this, it's great that we can come together and talk about our different views, and then how do we shape the development of AI. It's about shaping the development of AI that I want to talk about. On this slide, we talk about the promise of artificial intelligence. Karine has done an excellent job of summarizing some of the applications. I just want to go back a little bit to say, how does AI work? As alluded to by both Joanne and Karine, AI works by searching for patterns in large data sets and then using these patterns to make predictions or recommendations. So what we think of is that AI is really more accurately portrayed and called computational intelligence. It's a tool, and I think these are some of the points that Joanne has made so very nicely as well. It's a tool that can help to make recommendations or provide insights based on past learnings. And AI can enable new leapfrogs when they're used by subject matter experts in each of the sectors. So let me give you an example. For example, in healthcare, in the work of our lab in Cambridge, England, with Project Inner Eye, our researchers use AI technologies, including image analysis, to lower the amount of time doctors need to diagnose cancerous cells in patient CT scans. And so what this is that it's a perfect combination in terms of what AI can do, which is computational intelligence and detection, with what humans can do, which is very much about let's spend more time to understand the personalized treatment. So this really gets us to sort of the next part of it. And one of the things that was really gratifying to see at the OECD conference on AI was that everyone really, really believed in the development of AI to be human-centered. At Microsoft, we firmly believe in using AI to empower and create new opportunities for every person and every organization that can then lead to this leapfrog. And so that's why, if you look at this, our vision is very much about using AI to amplify human ingenuity. Because we believe that in order for AI to realize a huge potential, the first thing that it needs to do is be very, very much centered on human capabilities in terms of coupling what AI is good at, which is learning patterns, developing insights from large data sets, et cetera, with what humans are good at, which is creativity, empathy, the ability to frame problems, fairness, judgment, the ability to collaborate, et cetera. And so, next please. When we start to look at this, what does it take for AI to be broadly adopted? And at Microsoft, we use the term designing AI to earn trust, or trustworthy AI rather than ethics, because ethics, and this was in the example, in the definition that Joanne used, we believe that ethics is defined by a given society. And so as a global company, for AI to be adopted more broadly and realize its potential, it needs to earn trust by all the different stakeholders involved. And so from that perspective, here are some of the principles. And it was interesting because I looked at the principles that were put on the table and proposed by Vice Minister Tominaga, and there's a perfect overlap in terms of reliability and safety, fairness, privacy and security, but also inclusiveness. We believe that AI needs to support and enable every person. And underlying all of this is transparency and accountability. I just want to take one of the dimensions, which is fairness. This was brought up by I believe Joanne, and one of the things about fairness is that in the word embedding example that she used, that's a clear example of how AI can be used as a tool to address issues in fairness, right? Fairness means understanding what about the algorithm. Is it in the data sets, for example, or is it in the way the algorithm works? And what we believe in when we look at fairness is, first of all, let's make sure that we can understand how the algorithm was developed, what are the characteristics of the data sets, et cetera. But in terms of what to do with that, that's a very nuanced conversation that needs all the different stakeholders to be at the table, because what's fair is different from one community to another, one application to another, and also one society to another. Next slide, please. And so the last issue that I want to address in my comments is really that in order for AI, again, to realize its potential and to be trustworthy, we really need to address issues around future of work. And here, there's not consensus on whether the net benefits of AI will be positive or negative. However, I think what everyone will agree on is that AI will change the nature of work. So for example, in 3 ways: the type of work. Recent studies show that approximately 20 to 30% of the working age population are engaged in some type of independent work. The type of jobs will change because skills that people have learned when they first enter college won't be applicable, for example. And types of jobs. So these are all issues that we're working with others, working through to try to understand. And so we believe that because many of the skills are changing, the conversation around work needs to be changed to one on skills. And one of the issues is very much about how do we collect and identify what skills are needed and compare that with what are some of the skills that are available. So one step that's necessary actually is to agree on, for example, a taxonomy of skills that's used by all the different stakeholders at the table. So that's an example. Lifelong development, but also in digital skills. And here's where AI can also provide some of the answers in terms of enabling learnings, enabling people to understand what are the sociological issues. And then lastly, very much that worker protection and social safety nets issues really need to be addressed. Next slide, please. So I was also asked to talk a little bit about the Partnership on AI. This is an organization that was formed in September of 2016. There's currently more than 50 partner organizations across the world. And this includes business, but also, for example, civil society. On the board, for example, are the American Civil Liberties Union, the Human Rights Watch, etc. UNICEF is also involved as one of the organizations. There are, for example, the MacArthur Foundation, academics, etc. It's got organizations not just from the US, but also Asia and around the world. And the notion is that early on, we very much recognize that as AI is a new technology, as it develops, what's best is really for stakeholders and people who are involved in the development, deployment of the technology to get together and share best practices, because this is a way in which we can talk about how to mitigate challenges, etc., and really very much foster AI to realize that potential for enabling and transforming societies. So lastly, in the next slide, please. It's just some policy considerations, and I believe that all of this is already addressed within Colleen's slide in terms of, at this point in time, what we believe is necessary to realize the potential is very much policy frameworks that would enable broad deployment and continued innovation by involving multi-stakeholders like this forum and all the other forums. We believe that the conversation around AI needs to be anchored in practical principles, so not just very high-level principles, but how these principles can be translated into engineering practices, guidelines, etc., through the sharing of best practices. Skills training is a major part of that, and then that governments really need to continue to fund research, because AI can be a part of that solution. How can AI help fairness? How can AI help transparency measures, for example? And to come to a point that Colleen has alluded to, which is how do we address the questions around data availability to enable AI? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Caroline. Actually, one of the international organizations currently working diligently on ethics and AI issue is IEEE. And our next speaker, Ms. Karen McCabe. She is a Senior Director of Technology Policy at the IEEE. And Karen will introduce the IEEE's Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous System. And also she will provide the IEEE's viewpoint on priorities for multi-stakeholder cooperation. Karen, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the OECD. It's really a great pleasure to share the work that we're doing at the IEEE. As you've been hearing, there are many great initiatives, programs, and projects underway, and we're actually very honored to be part of that collection of activities and how we can make a contribution. So this afternoon, I'll share with you what we've been doing in this space through our global initiative. So next slide, please. It's a little small, so we'll... Okay. So the work actually officially began in IEEE in late 2015, where we were examining these issues and how a technical body like IEEE can engage in them. The IEEE's mission is to advance technology for the benefit of humanity, and we've been really focusing on that for humanity piece, looking at it from a well-being perspective primarily. So we gathered a lot of momentum and participants, and we officially launched the program in 2016. Right now, we have well over 200, probably closer to 300. Every time I need to update the slide every day. But we have experts from all around the world, and not just North America. We also have from African nations as well as Asia, etc. And we are pleased to say at this point we have 13 working groups working on various topics. I know it's a little bit of an eye chart, but on the right-hand side here, you see that we started initially looking at some general principles, but then, we got an amazing response to the work that we were doing, so the work kind of expanded. We were looking at different aspects regarding policy, law. And last year, we even engaged and created some new working groups on mixed reality. When you think about the intersection of intelligent systems and AI with augmented reality and virtual reality, so the mixed reality space as well, and looking at it from a well-being perspective as well. So we are pleased to say that we just completed the second version of the ethically aligned design document. It is a public document. It's out for public comment, which I believe the comments are due on April 30th. So if you're interested, you can Google this, and I can be more than happy to meet with you after to explain all of that. But we really, IEEE is rooted in being open and transparent and inclusive. There are values, and we know that the work really needs to be representative of the community and interested parties and stakeholders, and it's a multi-stakeholder process of how we're developing this. So again, more to come on that, but we are very open to getting feedback from anyone who wants to get involved in this. The other thing to note, and I'll get to that in a few seconds, is that this work inspired 11 IEEE standards. So it's a little bit of an interesting space for us because we're a technical standards developer. So how are you incorporating ethics and these issues into your standards? And the way we look at it is if you think of common practices like security by design or privacy by design, you sort of think of ethics in a sense or trust by design and how standards can play a role in examining those issues. Next slide. So just to dwell a little bit more on this version 2, again, it was just launched. It is open for comment, and we do recommend that people take a look at it. It is quite a substantial piece of work based on contributions from all those 13 committees I mentioned. It produces a set of recommendations, if you will, primarily for technologists and developers, but also for policymakers, and to take into consideration those various aspects. So it's a complex set of issues that we address when we look at AI, as we've been discussing on this panel, and this document helps to frame them with a set of practical recommendations that people can use moving forward. Next slide. So as I noted, the standards that have been produced out of this, and I know at the standards board meeting of IEEE about a week and a half ago, I think 3 more standards were added to this list. So the work is growing. Just so you know, for those who are not familiar with the standards world, the P means it's a project, so it's under development. So all of these projects that you see there have working groups. They're global in nature. People from all around the world are working on these. As the working groups for the document itself and the initiative of AI, these working groups are also open and to anyone who has an interest. We can definitely make this information available to you, and you can look them up, but you can get involved in these. And you can see here we're looking at a range of issues from data privacy to well-being as well, and looking at how we can even put indexes together on this. So we're looking at, it's like almost think of it as a hybrid standard. So we're looking at technical aspects and technology, but again, how can we address these issues of AI, autonomous and intelligent systems from a standardization perspective as well. So sort of a new era of standardization is sort of evolving as the standardization ecosystem is changing because of the challenges that we're facing and the new levels of technology that are impacting standardization. Next slide. So that's all I had. I know we want to get into a dialogue, so I don't necessarily want to belabor going over the initiative. And I know I've been asked to share some insights on the policy aspects. As we've been hearing, autonomous and intelligent systems, or AI, are really becoming increasingly a part of our society. We know that they're here already. Sometimes we don't realize how much they're impacting our lives already. And we see the great promise of what can come because of this level of technology. But also, we need to be going and looking at this with our eyes wide open and be honest about some of the challenges and how we might address them. So the use of these new powerful technologies can promote a range of social goods that can spur development across economies and society and numerous applications, including in commerce. We've heard employment, healthcare, transportation, politics, public safety, etc. But to protect the public from adverse consequences, intended or otherwise, resulting from these applications, effective public policies and government regulations will be needed. The goals of an effective AI policy should center on the protection and promotion of safety, privacy, intellectual property rights, human rights, and cybersecurity, as well as the public understanding of the potential impact of these systems on society. Without policies designed with these considerations in mind, there can be critical technology failures, even loss of life, and high-profile social controversies. So such events could engender policies that unnecessarily stifle entire industries or regulations that do not effectively advance public interest and promote human rights. So from the IEEE's perspective, informed by the work that we've been doing so far, we want to ensure that best practices are developed and that can inform and help educate the policymakers. And we believe that effective AI policies should embody a rights-based approach that achieves what we look at it from 5 basic principles: that they support, promote, and enable internationally recognized legal norms, that they develop workforce expertise in the technology, that it includes ethics as a core competency in research and development leadership, that regulate autonomous systems, intelligent systems to ensure public safety and responsibility, and to educate the public on the societal impact of these technologies. So with that, I know we're getting close to some dialogue here, so I'll close with that. So thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I do believe that educating policymakers is very important here. Considering the rapid progress of this whole technology, actually providing right knowledge and skill set to not just the general public, to the policymakers is very important. Having said that, I would like to introduce our last speaker, Professor Mark Leckrey. Professor Leckrey is assistant professor at the Department of Defense Studies of King's College, and he also teaches in Doha, Qatar. He is also an advisor to the AI initiative, Civic debate on the governance of AI, and he will provide an overview of the project. Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I have to add that actually I left King's College a year ago, so I'm now working here at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, and I'm in charge of global risk and resilience. But what I want you to present this afternoon is this initiative from this global civic debate from the Future Society, the AI initiative of the Future Society. And it originates from the understanding and the vision that AI is definitely double-use technology, and if you have followed discussion, for instance, a month ago within this building on autonomous weapons system, you'll see that there is an increasing discrepancy between what is being developed technologically and the policies that are being adopted. So the idea of this global civic initiative is to give population a voice in driving debate, and really the purpose is to give global citizen a voice in governing AI so that it maximizes benefits and the debate is open and inclusive. So this initiative was launched on 7th of September 2 months ago, and it comprises 4 phases. The first phase was a discovery phase where basically people could share their concern as well as their ideas about AI. And then from that phase, we moved into a new ideation phase in November that will last up until this month, and where we have 6 clusters of different ideas, and I will come to that in a few seconds. The next phase will be an exploration phase where basically the ideas that came up in the ideation phase will be put into tension between positive and negative impact. And the last phase, the convergence phase, the idea is to come up with a set of a recommendation. Just take the next slide, please. Right. So the methodology is really an exercise of collective intelligence where you have 4 different types of individuals besides those contributing. And I don't want to go too much in details, but basically you have people who are trying to extract the meaning of the different threads and discussions that are taking place on the platform. So now, as I said, we are in the second phase of the debate, this so-called ideation phase, and basically here 6 themes have been identified. The first one is about reinventing man and machine relationship. The second is about AI safety and security. The third one on governance framework of AI. The fourth on adapting the workforce for the age of AI. The fifth is about drive AI for public good, and the sixth one is imaginaries of AI. So if we scroll down into each of these different themes, you have sub-topic, and within the first one, reinventing man and machine relationship, there are 3 sub-thematics. One is about greater human rights in the age of AI, embedded ethics and values in machine, and resolving algorithmic bias. In the AI and safety and security, the 3 subtopics are about possible risk to humanity, vulnerabilities of cybersecurity, and addressing the risk of global AI arms race. In the third cluster, on the governance framework, there are 4 thematics. One is about enabling free flow of data. The second is creating regulatory sandboxes. The third is about solving for explainability. And the fourth is developing anticipatory regulation. The fourth basket is about adapting the workforce for the age of AI. And 3 sub-thematics: new skills and cognitive adaptability, 21st century union and collective bargaining powers, and the third one is managing the velocity of AI. The 5th basket, drive AI for public good, has to do with empowerment through access, integrating arts and social sciences in AI, and AI and inclusive communities. And the last one is imaginaries of AI, with 2 sub-thematics: shaping collective imaginaries and reimagining the future. So for each of these platforms, you can basically log on the website, which is aicivicdebate.org, and you can participate, provide inputs and your opinions about each of these different thematics. Beyond that, there have been some events that have been created around this different theme. For instance, 2 days ago, in cooperation with IEEE, there was a webinar on imaginaries of AI. And really the idea is to gather as much as possible support towards different issues of that relates to artificial intelligence. And at the end, the conclusion, the findings that will, the knowledge that will be extracted from this different debate on the platform will then be delivered to different organizations as well as a government. And the idea is really to use that as a way to make people, global citizens, contribute to the debate on AI, to have some kind of a say, and to maybe guide some government policies or organization policies about where we should go in terms of the values that we want to put into the AI. Can you just scroll to the very last one? No, this one. So this is the website, aicivicdebate.org. Again, it's open to everybody, and hopefully you'll share this address. You contribute to that because this is your way to have a direct say on these issues. I thank you for that.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for introducing the initiative on civic debate. And I should say that Vice Minister Dominaga excused himself to take an airplane. So on behalf of Vice Minister Dominaga, we have Mr. Nobu Nishikata here. So if you have a question towards to Mr. Dominaga, Mr. Nobu will provide responses on those questions. Having said that, I would like to open the floor. So if you have any comments on questions on this panel's presentations, yeah, please raise your hands. And yes, ready.
Hello, I'm Juliana. I'm from São Paulo, Brazil, and I'm here as part of the Youth at IGF program. My question has to do with qualification skills required to deal with AI. I see lots of efforts put in innovation and development of AI technology, but I have one concern about the qualification process to adapt people to the use of AI, because I don't see the same effort being put in this matter. What I see actually is a very serious politics of intellectual property enforcement and patent protection coming from the technology creators instead of a politics of access to technology capacitation. I'd like to know then, what's the agenda, or what should be the agenda for working qualification in the Global South, given the fact that we will face a great change in the labor force and people will be required to have higher technology skills to manage AI?
Thank you. We'll take a few more questions and then provide. Yes, please.
Mine's more, Johnny Penn, University of Cambridge. I guess mine's a provocation. In the presentation from Microsoft, a call was made for states to pay for more AI research. And my question is Microsoft doing all that they can to pay tax and to fund that research if that's truly their goal? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yes, this goes to the comment about AI is doing the right thing at the right time. Who gets to define what is right? I realize that's part of the ethics discussion, but I'm also particularly interested in hearing comments about how does the user maintain agency when they may or may not have had input into what that definition of right is and may not be able to intervene if they disagree with what the system's definition of right is.
Thank you. We will first address those three questions and we will open the floor again. So, Joanna, I will ask you to address the first question and the third questions. And Karen, I think you should address the second question. Karen,
okay,
yeah.
Sorry.
Joanna first. Yeah.
Sorry about this. I'm going to be rude and address all three of them very quickly because the first and the second relate to each other, actually. A lot of people worry about AI creating unemployment, but in fact, unemployment is at a record low in the areas that have a lot of AI right now. And the real problem is not unemployment, it is inequality. And inequality comes down to wealth redistribution. And you're absolutely right that the core thing that we have to realize when we see this incredibly low level of wealth redistribution, this incredibly high inequality, is that the elite need to realize, just the same as the rest of us, that it is not in their advantage to have the level of anarchy we're seeing right now. The last time we had this level of inequality led to World War I and the crash and World War II. So I don't think you can take these two things apart. It is a big issue in the Global South, also in Asia, that there isn't the welfare state to support people as they transition between jobs. And I think that's a huge issue we need to think about across the globe. We expect from increasing intelligence an increasing pace of change. And so how do we help people across these? And I've heard people like Accenture advising to large companies to expect that they're essentially going to have part of their workforce on sabbatical, like a university does, like a fifth of the workforce is going to be retrained. But how does that work for people in the gig economy? Or, how does that work for people in villages in the Global South? I think the way it works is as long as we keep enough money circulating, it doesn't have to be huge, I'm not talking about old school communism, but as long as we keep the minimum wages up, that the government puts some money out indeed the big tech puts some money out into wages, then people will find, they're innovative, they will find ways to generate new services for each other, and they will find ways to produce flows of capital. But this is what government is for. It needs to get rid of these kinds of distortions. I'm sorry, who has agency? I think I answered that too, all in one answer. Sorry about that.
So, thank you for the questions. With regards to the working skills questions, I think, so a couple different things that we're doing in terms of ensuring wide access to AI capabilities, and these have to do with the kinds of services that we're trying to make available on our platform, and the notion here is to enable micro, small, medium enterprises, developers. We also have open source some capabilities. In fact, we open source exactly the same kind of tools that we're using, on AI. So one part of the notion is for the MSMEs that are interested in integrating AI into their solutions or using AI to address societal challenges locally, we do have a program to make all of that available. Another part of the training and the social workforce that's not really talked about a lot is what's the sociological studies behind barriers that people have to retraining, for example. And we are doing a lot of work in this area to address, so when we think about policy, we think about balancing out economic, technical, social, cultural, and governance. And what we're seeing is that as technology such as AI becomes an integral part of society, understanding the social cultural aspects of this is really important. And Microsoft Research is very lucky in the sense that we have some fairly prominent sociologists working in India as well as in other parts of the world to do ethnology studies of some of these issues to understand, because that's the way in which a 20-year-old in the global north will learn very different from a 20-year-old in the global south or across their career development. This is why we're then using some of those capabilities to look at social compacts and what are some of the new ideas around that. So on the question of research, Microsoft invest in research, both on the technology side as well as on the sociological side. We comply with all regulations in every country that we operate in. We also maintain research facilities in multiple countries around the world and in all of those areas, we collaborate heavily with academics across the world.
Thank you, Karen. Before opening the floor, I would like to provide my take on those three questions. By the way, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Won Gi-min, and I'm the chair of the OECD Committee on Detailed Economic Policy, and I'm a professor at the State University of New York, Korea. And before that, I was actually the deputy minister of the Ministry of Science and ICT in Korea. So as I actually took this issue from the government perspective when I was deputy minister. When you look at this issue, actually, when you look at the OECD project, the title of OECD project Going Digital is Going Digital for Growth and Well-being. So not just growth. Joanna touched upon the issue of this inequality. Actually, inequality both on income and wealth, both aspects, the inequalities are growing rapidly, and that's the reason that Piketty and many actually economists pointed out the kind of urgency to address this issue. I'm not quite sure when you look at the statistics, it is directly related with technological development. So it is more complicated and complex issue. So I do not want to touch upon that issue, but using digital technology and AI to address both growth and well-being is critical. And our Brazilian colleague mentioned about this qualification issue. We are talking about this AI here. At the same time, half of the world population is not actually enjoying the benefit of broadband. So they are not connected to the internet. So in one part of the world, we are talking about how to use this fantastic technology, artificial intelligence and blockchain and other emerging technologies. And the other part of the world is not actually having any kind of experience on this kind of technology. And here, we are sitting at the IGF, not in the OECD. So we have to look at this issue from the global perspective. But recognizing this issue, this detail divide, growing detail divide, both this use of the technology and access part is one thing, but providing the solutions and the measures to address this issue is much more difficult than recognizing the problem itself. That's the reason actually we need more discussion on this issue, and that's the reason actually OECD, ITU, and many international organizations are working on that. At this table, I don't think nobody can provide the right answer or set of answers which can resolve all the matters. But building consensus about the urgency and the importance of this issue is the first step, and get the kind of the ideas where we can start together can be the second step. That's the reason actually OECD is currently working on this project on Going Digital, and hopefully at the end of next year we'll provide some concrete kind of findings which we could share, OECD could share together with the world community. And I would like to also say about this agency issue, because we do not have a governance system to address these AI-related matters. That's the reason IEEE is currently diligently working together with the whole academia and technical community. We actually experienced a very similar thing in the internet governance, but in the internet governance, we had this mechanism, ICON, and actually, when ICON was established, the global population did not have an opportunity to agree or disagree with the creation of ICON. But ICON made an organic development with the development of this internet technology. And here we have this AI. The implication of AI might be bigger than the internet itself, so we have to think about what kind of model we will use to address this issue for governing the AI. And we actually got some lessons from the internet. No single entity could provide the answer. That's the reason multi-stakeholder approach is critical. And that's the reason we need this kind of platform to discuss the issue and find out the solution together. Having said that, I would like to open the floor again. So, any questions? Oh, yeah. I'm not sure you are qualified or not, but please.
Hello, everyone. We have a question from one remote participant. His name is Carlos Guerrero, and he's asking the old panel, how do you think that internet governance is connected with AA policy making, and if they believe that in the future we will need a space like the Internet Governance Forum to discuss more deeper about the artificial intelligence when this topic turns out more and more important for our society. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and I think I already provided the response on that specific topic. So I would like to the floor again. Yes, lady first, and then.
Hi, Teresa here, Oxford Internet Institute. I was thinking also in this direction, and my question is simpler and more concrete, and it's especially concerning the responsible application of AI. It's basically how can we, are we dealing with the question of short-term goals of algorithms and AI implication translating into more long-term implications for evolution of the society? If I rephrase that, basically, how can we avoid algorithmic determination caused by serving us information from algorithms that are supported by AI instead of the other way, instead of us influencing dynamically the AI for the future, for the alignment with our thinking. Yeah.
Thank you, Brad. Yes.
Hi, Matt Chesson from the U.S. Department of State. So I'm wondering, when we're talking about issues around transparency, bias, and fairness in AI, most of the solutions that I tend to hear focus really on the developer side, on the technologist side, and saying that we need more training in those types of issues for the people who are developing these AI systems. But I wonder if we don't have that backwards. Shouldn't we actually be training the public policy professionals in how to understand AI systems and to work directly with the developers these are the people who basically are trained in their profession is balancing these types of issues to create good policy. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about the need for these types of specialties within the public policy profession. So I'm just curious what the panel's views are on that.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Izumi Aizu from Tokyo, and I really enjoyed this panel. I have some stupid question, if I may. How many of you have heard the case or the Fab Lab case made in Grenoble, which was burnt down early in November? Have you heard of that? Okay, a real Fab Lab is a digital fabrication laboratory. It's not AI or not related, but the headline says that they're sort of burnt by the radical anarchist or anti or neo-Luddite against the diffusion of the digital culture. And given some of the political sentiments we see in certain countries getting against the globalization, they want to be their own country first, and certainly there's elements against the being left out from the technological development. And so my question is that have you at OECD or IEEE considered or going to consider these kind of new activisms against the development, especially the AI, as on the early presentation by Mr. Tominaga said, that it could become uncontrollable. And so giving a sort of fundamental sort of threat or worry that the humans at large may not be able to control, but also the humans in the South or in the very much, against these status quo may target a certain kind of the activities of the AI, which might be a little bit difficult for us to deal with. So these are the areas of my concern and question. Thank you.
Thank you. We have approximately 15 minutes. So we will take these 3 questions first. And I'll open the floor once more. And we'll take 3 more questions and we'll wrap up the whole session. And this is the last session, so we have some liberty to extend a little bit further. So we have 3 questions. The first one is about this technological determinism, how we can avoid that, and how we can take advantage of this AI, not actually become the victim of this our own technological development. And second one is I like this part actually, because definitely we call the government as a policymaker. There is a good reason that we call them policymaker, which means that they have the kind of authority and legitimacy to make a decision. But sometimes, actually, when you look at this technological development, sometimes engineers and scientists themselves make some kind of fundamental decisions which affect the kind of the impact could be influenced all levels of the society. So I think that is a very good question. And third one is about the OECD and IEEE's intention to address these social issues, not the technical and economic issues. So I think I will ask Karen first about the third question, and then I will ask this I will address the second question. And the first question, Joanna, can you address?
Okay.
Yes. So starting with the first one. Yeah. Joanna, can you go first?
Oh, you want me to go first?
Yes,
oh, no, I
yes,
thought I had like a minute to think about this.
I was a little confused myself.
Okay. All right.
So if I'm understanding the question, because it was a little bit complex, we're talking about the social issues of
the anarchists.
Our initiative is open, and we are looking at the social implications. When we talk about well-being, that is also part of it. So the initiative itself in its second document has not necessarily have a working group dedicated to that, or has incorporated that as part of their dialogue and their work. However, you do catch my attention. We are looking to expand that work and to address these types of issues that are arising. So my answer you know, it's that we would bring that back, and I will commit to bringing that back to the initiative to see how they can address that and how they want to handle that. And after the session, I'd be happy to get your contact, and we'll connect with you.
Before moving forward to this, responding to the second question, actually OECD, I already mentioned that the title of the OECD's project is Going Digital for Growth and Well-being. So actually well-being part actually includes the concerns actually you raised. But the thing is, actually addressing this issue is not providing a technical solution. We have some social policy measures to address this kind of issues. So OECD is a kind of body which addresses labor issue, education issue, and competition issue. So our colleagues in the OECD are actually working on that agenda. And in terms of the second question about how to educate these policymakers and giving them the kind of the right knowledge and skill sets to address this issue, I think this is always a daunting task. I had been working for the government for 29 years, and whenever new issues coming up, even though they understand the kind of essence of the problem, they have to deal with the Congress, the legislative, and they also deal with the media, and they also deal with the kind of the incumbents who would be affected by this kind of disruptive technology. So it's not easy, but at the same time, it is very important and critical because they are the kind of the body which will actually formulate the policy. So that's the reason I think this kind of multi-stakeholder approach is very important, including the technical community like IEEE. So having a kind of dialogue with technical community and also the civic society, which would be also affected by this technology, is important to formulate the right policy. But in order to do that, I think the administrative system itself has some kind of flexibility to recruit the engineers within the government system, and each government has different kind of recruiting systems. So I think this is the kind of issue government should think about, how to make their system more flexible to recruit the right people for addressing this kind of technical issues. Having said that, I would like to invite Joanna to address the first question. Yeah.
All right. So, oops. I can't get the hang of doing this for myself. I expect AI to do that. All right, here we go. Right, so the question, back to the first question, was this thing about the algorithmicizing. I can't say this, and I'm a native English speaker. The making algorithmic of human society. This is related to, I talked about the problem of artificial general intelligence, or the non-problem of that. This question is related to the problem of superintelligence, although it's a better description of it than you normally get. And superintelligence is an idea that's been kicked around for about a century now, that if you can learn how to learn, then you're going to get this exponential increase in your intelligence. And so some people are afraid that that's what AI is going to do without us. But I would actually argue that this is what we have been doing since we've had writing. So if you look at the period 10,000 years ago, when we got writing, since then we have been exponentially, in fact, even on a log scale, exponentially increasing in numbers. And now we're dominating the biomass of the planet, and sustainability is one of our two biggest problems. That and inequality, I would say, are the two biggest problems. So it is a problem. It's one we're embedded in. So, and that's why I like the way you cast it, about that we have this concern about, you know, what the North is doing to the South, or what the big tech is doing to the rest of us, or what government is doing to us if it has all of our data. And I think the only thing we can do is be vigilant. I mean, I think this is the ongoing problem of politics. One of the previous questioners asked about that I said that the chair wasn't AI and what AI was. That definition I gave was about intelligence in general. The only difference between natural and artificial intelligence is that artificial intelligence is used is generated by artifacts, which means that we are responsible for having built it, right? So computationally, they're the same, but the difference is about our responsibility and how we govern it. And I think that the things I've been very cheered by this panel because there didn't used to be this consensus about the incredible importance of transparency and auditability. And, but contrary to something that was said on the previous panel, I want to say that's not even really a trade-off. When people go and look at it, when they make their systems easier to understand, it turns out they're easier to debug. So the rules that we're using to figure out how to make it clear and you audit humans without knowing how their synapses are connected. So don't believe the stuff, we can't audit deep learning because we don't know what the weights do. In the worst case, it's the same as auditing a bunch of accountants, right? And probably we have more information than that. So I actually think there's no easy answer. It is the ongoing problem of how do we govern ourselves, how do we do these trade-offs. But I think it's critically important that we do get involved with this transparency and sign up for auditing and for regulation and for governance, and that we do pay our taxes and contribute to governance. But of course that we also remain vigilant and make sure the governance is doing the right thing.
Yes.
Thank you for the questions. I just want to add a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think that, to the question around determinism, one of the things that we look at and have really tried to emphasize is that AI is really automating what human beings are already doing. And I think this was part of the point that, Joanna made, which is, so for example, when you're looking at the use of algorithms in loan application as an example. So today, human beings are doing this. And so what's going on, with artificial intelligence is that now computational intelligence is used to try to automate a part of the task, but then we absolutely believe that human beings in the end are responsible and needs to be able to make the decisions and needs to understand what was involved in the recommendation and also information around that recommendation. So if a particular loan application process was approved, or let's say was rejected, then what went into that rejection? How certain is that decision? Is it 80% certain, or is it 40%? And what makes up the remainder? If it's 80, then what makes up the 20%? Let me give you a funny example, right? The ex-chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, when he stepped off, retired, applied to get his mortgage, his house refinanced, and his application was rejected because he didn't have a job. What he was applying for was, more than what he could provably show he was earning. And, so that's where the conversation comes in about there needs to be an understanding of what the technology is used for and what came, how it was developed, what data was used, et cetera. So we very, very much believe in developing and working with others to make sure to understand, transparency. What went into the data? Let's develop a transparency template in terms of what went into the data, what was used to test the algorithms, how was the algorithms chosen, et cetera. And this is where standards can be a really interesting and helpful conversation. I think in general, there is a tendency to ascribe more authority to technology than exists. To the question of educating policymaker, I think AI is really just a long line of technology that policymakers do not understand and has always had a little bit of a negative attitude towards. And what we're seeing in research and surveys that we've done across the world is that this tension between having to rely on something that they don't understand, but the need to use it is further exacerbated in the conversation around artificial intelligence. There are some really good projects that we've come across and collaborated in terms of how to use AI to better policy development. And I think those are some interesting, that sits at kind of that interesting junctures. But completely agree with you that this is very much of a needed conversation.
Thank you, Carrie. Mark? Yeah.
On the issue of agency, I have two remarks. One is about almost a paradox that I very much agree with you that there is a tendency to solve our technological problems with technological solutions. I think that the growth of the Internet of Things, because of the magnitude of the data that are being generated, it's impossible for human being to deal with that. So what we'll look at in terms of solution is a technological solution that will create in itself its own problems. And I think that Ulrich Beck has understood this concept very early in his book on risk societies. So we are creating the conditions for us to become more and more vulnerable. On the other hand, on the issue of the agency, what we're witnessing is that we are empowering human beings to a level that we've never seen in human history. Nowadays, the fact that a single human being like Snowden can steal amount of data that is beyond what was possible a few years ago, this is completely new. And in my feeling, international security, we have there are strong concerns about how this technological development will be used, because by empowering human being, what you're doing is you are shifting the referent of security from what is used to be here within this framework, the UN states, which are about 200 states, to almost 7 billion referent of securities. And we're talking about AI, but if we talk about synthetic biology, CRISPR, for instance, the gene editing technology, the ability of now people to interfere with genetics, and we have the first case of self-biohackers 2 weeks ago that use CRISPR to change the way it's changed. This will create huge security problems and concern in the very near future. So there needs to be a debate, not just on the values that are being put into algorithm, but also the way these technologies will be used. Because I can already tell you, I've been working in terrorism for quite a while now, that these people are already thinking about ways to use this technology. Just you look at the use of drones and the way drones have been used by, for instance, the Islamic State in the Battle of Mosul. These people are very reactive. And so what I'm really afraid is that even if 99.999% of population or global population has some good intentions, with that kind of technology, you give a power to a very small minority to have a tremendous impact, and this should be a global concern.
Yes, indeed, that is a global concern, and I think we collectively address that issue together. So, floor is open again. So, yes, please.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. I am Catherine Sayes. I'm a journalist for Intellectual Property Watch. And although challenges have been described as being very serious, I was wondering, where does the intellectual property issues fit into the policy debate, the increasing use of trade secrets, for example, and patents and copyrights? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you two are the final two interveners, please.
Hi, my name is Hani Dabak from Geneva. I have maybe a naive question here, and maybe partly answered by yourself a little earlier. But we've seen there's a lot of positive potential of AI, especially human and artificial intelligence working together. And it's really good to see so many frameworks around channeling that energy into the right way. My question is, what kind of safeguards do we have that prevents this kind of abuse, or in French you say déraper, that runs away from us either on purpose or on its own? It seems to me that AI is very different to previous technologies that we've had, like second and third revolutions. I think we need to treat it in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, yes. Hi, I'm Veridiana. I'm from a Brazilian organization that deals with media freedom of expression and digital rights. And my question is that we know that bias in algorithm raises concerns related to the right of recognition in AI, since the algorithm tends to reinforce general social patterns and disregard differences and specificities. This can occur because of a hidden bias in the developers or because of a hidden bias in the databases. One path to the solution, in my view, is to have a more diverse database on the one hand, or to have more diverse developers in the other hand, which brings the importance of a more democratic access to these databases. So, my question is how to reconcile this with the need to protect personal data involving highly sensitive data in some cases, if we are talking about right of recognition, and the fact that anonymization is something that can be reversed, especially when the logic is to collect more and more data.
If you have more questions, I think after the session, I think formally, I think we have concluded the session. We already go beyond the scheduled time. So what I would like to do is actually give the floor to all panelists. So you all know that these 3 questions presented to us. So if you could address one of or any of those questions, do that by taking advantage of this final opportunity. And if you want to make any kind of concluding remarks, based on the kind of the comments and interventions from the floor, I think this is an opportunity. So we'll start with Mark in this order. Yeah, Mark, please.
Right. I just want to address the issue of safeguards. I think this is a major issue. And for instance, I refer again to the use of AI in weapon systems, so-called autonomous weapon system, that has been debated within this framework at the UN for the last 4 years. There has been no agreement so far among states about what kind of values or limitation that we should put into them. And the idea of the so-called GGE group on laws related to autonomous weapon system was originally to think about should we preemptively ban autonomous weapon system from being developed. And the analogy was with blinding lasers that were banned in the 90s, that this weapon would be weapons that would create more harm than they would solve other problems. And I think that we've passed the threshold, because you have a couple of states now that have been committing themselves into autonomous technology in the military field. So the safeguards, very difficult to say. I think that this is where a global society and civil society should play a role by putting some pressure on governments to put some safeguards, because once the genius is out, my fear is that it will be too late. If you take 3D printing, for instance, very early in 2013, you had the first codes that were developed, were published open source on internet to create guns, 3D printed guns. They're not very accurate, but they are out there. So if you take a virus like Stuxnet, that was developed by states by Israel and the US to disable Iranian centrifuges, this virus is still out there. And once the code is out, it is out. So putting safeguards is, I don't think that any of us have a solution, but gathering supports and opinions and pressuring governments through a global civic debate is very important, because these are key issues to address.
Thank you for the question. With regards to safeguards, beyond the autonomous weapons and the more security-related issues, we don't have specific safeguards related to AI at this point, but one part of the work that we're beginning is, an important part of the work actually, is to determine where we have existing frameworks that would apply to AI, or where we might need new safeguards. And so it's important not to start setting up new safeguards when some existing laws and frameworks that we have, for example, in the area of privacy protection and many other area, might, in some cases, be adequate, and in some cases might not. So that's one of the main purposes of the work we're beginning.
Okay, here we go. I want to go to the bias question to start out with, and then I'll wrap up around that away. I want to point out from my talk, if you remember the slide with the actual picture, bias is not solved just by getting enough data. So yes, we should have diversity. Yes, we should be careful about the data. But the fact is that the world is unfair now, as we hear if we go to the right sessions here. We hear that a lot. It's an ongoing problem. Fairness is not something you get by adding noise into the vectors. Machine learning people say that to me. No, then you get nothing, right? You just get noise, right? Fairness is something we negotiate. It's about politics and economics for helping inform the politics. It's about the humanities for choosing what our goals are, right? We need to invest in SSH because that's where some of these, social science and humanities, because that's where some of these challenges are coming from. And I really wanted to say that in the previous one. You talk about politicians not knowing enough about tech, but big tech is basically becoming like some of the big countries in the world, and it needs to know more about the social sciences. So this is a two-way problem. So this is sort of my wrapping up statement then. And with respect to things running away from us, as I said, you could think of the technology we already have, our dominance of the ecosystem. There's almost no mammals left on the Earth's surface that aren't things that are either people or that we eat or that we play with. You know, we see these nice movies of wild animals vanishing. There's almost nothing left. Our society is a runaway process, and AI is part of our society. It's part of the way by which we're doing these dominations. So as I said, this is about politics. It's not a separate thing, although I do agree that we have to keep working on the technology. I don't mean to be overly scary. I really do love the stuff and some of the innovations people are coming up with. For example, the IEEE standards. That's one way to try to, by which technologists are trying to connect to politicians. We're trying to offer these standards as we try to understand how to make transparency easier, then the politicians can grab that. We do have to have regulation. We do have to be under law, and I don't think we should fight against that. I think we should figure out how to make that as effective and as flexible, to be able to deal with the future. We have a joint goal here, and government is something that we use in order to be able to have sufficiently stable societies, to build companies, and to build families. So, yeah.
Thank you, Joanna. Karen?
Yeah, I echo, Joanna, what you said, because I was also going to address the bias as well. There is no simple fix. There's no simple answer. I mean, it's really going to take a collective from many disciplines, generations, cultures. From a technical community perspective, we look at it and reference, my opening presentation about the initiative that we have at IEEE and the document on ethically aligned design. We're looking at how we can address these issues. Technologists can address these issues and these challenges, including bias. If we look at how, when they're developing the technology, that they're looking at the ethics and the impact. It's not the one single answer, but I think if we all sort of play our role and we keep an open dialogue and we break down our silos of, the different sectors that we're in, or industries or communities we represent, then we can make progress, but it's going to take time.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, Caroline?
Thank you. I want to address the question on IP a little bit and then take that into a broader conversation around regulations. So to the question of IP as well as any copyright, et cetera, we do agree that AI needs access to a lot of data. However, existing laws applied. So privacy laws, with regards to the copyright issue, it's enabling reasonable use of the assets. The copyright laws are there to protect the commercial part and the commercial capabilities of such assets. What AI is doing is really, so for example, if you're looking at building a translation machine or text recognition machine, there's a need to go out there to scrape the data, to learn, to train the algorithms, to learn the language and the context and the structure of the language, and that's very different than what copyright law was meant for initially. So I want to go back to, there's a sense around the room and from others that I've said and that says AI today is not regulated. That is not true. AI is regulated by existing sectoral regulations. So the Fairness and Discrimination, for example, in the US, we have the Federal Credit Reporting Act that prevents discriminatory treatment. So that applies HIPAA in terms of the use of health data and privacy regulations, et cetera. All of those sectoral regulations apply to any applications of AI, safety in vehicles, as well as horizontal regulations such as the EU GDPR, et cetera. And we absolutely believe that all of those laws need to be complied to if the technology is to be trustworthy, going back to the point that I made. And so another point, the last point I want to make is going back to, because we are at the IGF and there's a strong belief here in terms of multi-stakeholder, several of the panelists have brought this up already. I think building out safeguards, making the technology trustworthy requires all of us to be at the table so that we can understand what are the issues. But how can the technology be a part of the solution? What are the other issues? Because technology is not the answer to everything. How can policymakers sit at the table and help us think about, the issues that really need to be addressed? What should be regulated versus what can be shared through best practices, because the technology is evolving so quickly. That's why we're all here, and that's where the safeguard is going to come from, because all of us can identify what's important. And then it becomes that sort of very complex, so how do we work together to make this technology work? Because we're all here, we're shaping. We all have the power and the ability to shape the future.
Thanks, Karen. I think that's very good concluding remark as a panel. I would like to say thanks to especially all panels here, and actually I would like to say thanks even to Mr. Dominaga. He's not with us at this point, but thank you very much. And I also want to say thanks to all participants and your active engagement in this specific session. Actually, going back to, before concluding the session, going back to this IPR issue, there are many issues, such as when this algorithm develops new technology, who should own the IPR? So this is just one example. There are so many new and novelty issues, policy issues here in relation to artificial intelligence. And this issue is not the future issue. This is the present issue, and this is the kind of present policy challenge we should address in the global level. This is by definition global issue, and we have to work together. And I think the discussion in the IGF is very important, because all stakeholders should be involved in this discussion. And I'm looking forward to receiving actually more comments on this discussion, because OECD Going Digital project is open to everybody, and you could visit our website, OECD website on Going Digital. We have a dedicated website, so provide your comments on the kind of work of the OECD, which actually encompasses all policy issues. So having said that, I would like to say thanks to everybody, and thank you very much. We're concluding the session. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Always inspiring, always. Good job. All right. Yeah.
That was brilliant. That was really great. I can't believe I forgot to say the audio conference was Civic was real purpose. Hi, how are you? And that was great. All right. Okay, good. We have. Because I was so involved and I just didn't know. Oh, thank you. I cannot recognize you and me. We have cross paths. My figure comes from OCD. Thank you. I'm really sorry I've run out of my comments on it. I'm following your Twitter. Okay. Oh, fantastic.
Hello, everyone.
Hello?
Someone lost
Someone
his
lost the
phone.
phone?